In a dungeon on level 550, a guy was fighting a boss. It was a level 552 three-headed divine sea dragon. Master Ted had a slightly higher power level, namely level 559th. The guy knew that if he cut off one of the monster's heads, his powers would increase significantly, which is why he decided to use shooting pills against him. Ted cut off one head but realized that continuing alone was dangerous and it was worth finding another way. But it was too late. The sea creature attacked him with its unimaginably great flow of water, which washed away the boy and led the monster to the consolation of victory. But be that as it may, looking back she saw Ted, who was just stalling for time to cut off 3 heads at once. He was the first person in this world to defeat a level 550 creature. Ted was happy about this. As a reward from the system, he received the achievement of a lone hunter and the 601st level of power. Suddenly, the guy became despondent. After all, for this he spent a lot of money, love, on a monster, the only poison in the world, which can no longer be obtained like many other things. Having counted the values, he realized that he had gone too far by spending 2 million on it. But if he sold everything that was there, he would even remain in the black. But the most important thing for which all this was started is the blue crystal that drops from the boss monster. It still seemed to him that everything could go wrong because he was not unlucky in games and had not remembered such luck for a long time. 3 years after the game's release, the guy had a problem. All the developed lands were being destroyed, and his guildmates were getting into trouble before the siege. Ted thought it was complete crap and didn't understand the lack of luck in games. The guy headed to the next dungeon, namely the Hellfire Mountains. The path was also not easy, but he was given a way to break through his impenetrable shell. Namely, the sea dragon essence was supposed to awaken the weakened demon. Ted began to drip the resulting artifact into the cavity. He himself began to use a lot of amplifiers. Inferno Orochi level 650 woke up and was very angry. The guy was glad that due to the molting status the monster was weakened, and despite the difference in levels he managed to inflict huge damage. But Ted saw that the speed and power of the attack remained the same, so he had to retreat immediately. Despite his successful retreat, he had a hard time. After all, the blow came very close and he could have died on the spot from a direct hit. The difference in levels was huge and the chances of winning were less than 30%. But he decided to continue the battle. But despite the long battle, he still managed to successfully complete a solo raid on Inferno Orochi for the first time on the server. Being in the capsule for 2 days had a very strong effect and I was about to go to bed. He posted all his battles online, but they never got many views, so he thought he would just admire them in the future. Ted couldn't even imagine that these 2 videos would change his life in just one night. After all, the number of views began to grow exponentially. The day began as usual, or not quite. Among people, the most powerful viral video was discussed and many did not even believe in its existence. But as soon as they saw what was happening on the recording, they were shocked. There was no limit to the surprise because it was almost impossible to win alone. The video was called One-on-One versus Inferno Orochi, and the boss was level 650. Someone thought it might be computer graphics, but he was immediately told that it was impossible because it took more than 40 hours. Nobody knew who this guy was, but they said he was in the top 100 rankers. Ted, seeing such a return, decided to start streaming and educating people about his hunting method. Today, he had a good target for learning. Namely, he decided to organize a hunt for the Ogre King, although today their behavior was not normal because they gathered in a group. The main problem was that mobs stuck to such creatures less, forming an army. For this reason, he needed to kill at least one king of the orgs. He used the enhanced attack skill and killed the monster with 1 blow, but now he needed to avoid the counterattack due to the skill's cooldown. And Ted decided to go down to tease the little ones, explaining that usually such large creatures are shot one by one, although when the kings were in a group it was even easier to fight them. To do this, it was necessary to get closer to the monster. When dodging one Ogre King, you had to lure the second one onto yourself. While the monster was collecting his thoughts, it was necessary to continue, and this means that we can immobilize the first one who tried to attack us. The main task was to try to dodge in such a way that it would hit a relative. After all, this way there will be an opportunity to reduce your expenses on this battle. Ted successfully dodged and set the ogres on each other, knowing that they had no brotherly feelings. And all that was left was to do a little bit of thinning out the small fry while the 2 monsters were killing each other. Now there was only one king left, and killing him was easy for the guy. Afterwards, he began to say goodbye to his subscribers, explaining that this was all. At this time, Miss Rudisa was watching him, asking her manager if he had offered the guy cooperation. The man explained that Ted had poor speech skills and that it would be inappropriate. The woman herself understood this, knowing that his comments were very meager. She still wanted to work with him because of his charisma and excellent skills. The guy was already finishing his live broadcast. He couldn't even imagine that everything would reach personal streams. After all, when he woke up and looked at his phone, his surprise knew no bounds. All activity had increased 300 times in one night. Ted hoped that now his failures would come to an end, but then something distracted him. His phone was ringing off the hook and he assumed it was his manager offering him a role in the show. Last time he said that he was not ready to act in something like this and refused. Still, having accepted the call, he watched the disappearing monsters and asked who it was. He heard from the receiver that they were calling him from CGTV, which made Ted's eyes pop out of his head. The thing was that they were interested in his profile with a video on the internet, and they invited him to visit the office and were even going to send their people. But the guy immediately stopped this and said that there was no point in sending people after him, and was already starting to hang up, saying that he might call back himself. Ted immediately walked away and could not understand why one of the most powerful guilds was calling him. Realizing that they most likely wanted to hire him, he began to get angry. There were 7 guilds recognized by the game administration in the territory of the Fateful Chronicles. They were the richest, and CGTV and Alibaba dominated China. Ted understood that all this was not just like that, but he decided to go on a further journey through the game, namely to the market. The cores of Orochi and the Sea Dragon are his main goal in going to this place. The seller explained that if these cores were to be decomposed, it would no longer be possible to restore them. But what worried him most was the fact that guilds suddenly started contacting him after the video, and he was not interested in money. And all because Orochi was mentioned very specifically. Then the readiness was announced and Ted's anger immediately burst out. Both bosses were acquired by different companies and also marked. But was it legal? The guy suspected that some tricks were being used to mark the monsters. He tried to defeat these monsters and put them on the internet, so his anger grew stronger. Ted considered it another failure. It seemed to him that the time for such bad luck was about to end. Everything was bad. It seemed to him that they would definitely track him down in any case. He wanted to find a way to avoid the consequences in every possible way and scoured the messages. Here, urgently meant typing something in an open window. He decided to write a reply letter in which he thanked for the interest in the video and gameplay, and also reported, Ted was so distracted by writing letters that he didn't even notice he was being followed. An arrow attack was already flying towards him. But the guy felt it and turned around despite the fact that she had almost reached her goal. He managed to dodge with minimal injuries, receiving only a scratch on his face. People in uniform were heading towards him and praising him for his detection skills. The crowd was interested in why he got entangled with their things. Ted was scared that everything happened too quickly, and what bothered him most was the full high-class uniform. But the chief suddenly changed his attitude and began asking if he knew what the guy had done, because the losses were huge. The guy tried to explain that it wasn't intentional, and if some bosses are marked, signs need to be put up. Here the activation of the skill Hell Ghoul Hands was heard, which was frightening. He was pinned to the floor and Ted didn't even know what to do. But as it turned out, it was not a question. He was being told about his guilt. Although what interested him most was the fact that the famous ranker was in front of him. They didn't care whether it was done on purpose. Then he pulled out an interactive panel in front of Manhwa. Ted explained with a sneer that he had managed to find out something. In fact, he was printing an appeal to Rudasa TV, which was a streaming service. The guy claimed that the news of 2 guilds trying to unfairly obtain boss cores would ruin all the rankings. The mage was angry at his stubbornness. Ted also said that if they try to harm him, he will immediately send this letter. He was released calmly and went on his further journey, launching the broadcast. But he announced that the news this time is sad, because this will be the last stream for personal reasons. He had been inflicted with the Seal of the Monarch's Arrogance, and the Shadow of Death curse had also engulfed his body during that meeting. Although this was not the only thing that befell him that day, his body was covered with various dark marks. Ted was given a week to delete the character and the letters, and if this is not done, he will die endlessly like everyone else around him. But the guy was not going to give up and said that he would definitely expose the illegal activity. The threats from the magician continued because the lawlessness would be forgotten in a year, but the persecution could last forever. The pursuers left him, leaving the choice up to Ted. Despite everything, the guy was not going to give up. Although everything was in vain, the curses did not come off. He didn't want to lose such a memory. He and his family had been playing Fate Chronicles for 10 years and didn't want to erase all the characters. He always looked at the character deletion tab and thought about further actions. As long as he followed the rules, his family was not in danger, but thoughts about the situation did not leave him. Then he got the idea to delete the account and create a new one, because the experience will allow him to level up quickly. A drop fell before pressing. Ted was in tears. He had worked so hard to level up and give it his all. But why was he so unlucky? But what worried me most was the musket rifle, of which there were no more than 1,000 in this world. It took Kei 3 years to get this item, and the whole problem was defeating 10,000 dead people. So the decision was to carry out this weapon with dignity. The guy worked really hard to get it, and Ted's decision was final. He would finish the job with his own hands. Now he was ready to show the farewell content, namely, the Soul Seal. It was a powerful piece of equipment that increased all stats by 20%, but the success rate was only 10. But in case of failure, the probability of destruction was maximum. Ted was interested in trying his luck over a long period of time, which is why he made this decision. The musket was made from melted fragments of the gates of hell. It was the 9th, and people asked to give it back. Someone advised to contact a high-ranking workshop, but the guy didn't care about the success of this event now. After all, this way he could more easily give up the weapon, since he would have to delete the account anyway. Still, he made a note to his viewers that it is best never to risk such chances. Ted decided to get started, and a tear appeared on his face as he said goodbye to the fruits of 10 years of work. The master did not understand why this guy came to him, mocking him with tears, and was preparing to ask a question. But as soon as the guy told him the course of action, the master announced the successful enchantment. He was in shock and could not understand how this was possible. New characteristics appeared before him, namely, increased durability, a cloud recharge skill appeared, and much more. Many people said that this was expected from Ted himself, and the guy was shaking and, turning around, he asked to perform another soul seal, but they immediately began to dissuade him. Tears flowed like a river, and he tried to leave behind senseless hopes and he wanted a quick break. But another unexpected thing happened. Once again, everything went well. Where did Ted's failure go? The guy asked to perform another enchantment, which turned out to be just as successful. The master called him very lucky based on the events, but he did not understand how this was possible. Ted planned to leave quietly and asked for more and more, although every time luck was maximally on the player's side. Shedding tears, he asked to continue in order to obtain a negative result. He was upset that he didn't need such luck because he would have to remove Ted anyway. The master said that he had never seen such a lucky person, but they thanked him for what he saw because the blacksmith had never seen anything like this in his entire life. All base rates have increased by 30%, and the value has increased into the millions. Despite the 3.5 times increase in power, it cannot stand up to the 2 highest guilds. He understood that he couldn't win against Manhwa, so creating a weapon with 7 enchantments doesn't change anything at all, but it could be sold. It wouldn't do any good because Ted would have to be erased, even though he spent 10 years pumping up. He sweated and worked hard, and now he has to start all over again because of some jerk. The feeling of emptiness was overtaking him faster and faster, and this state could not simply be filled with money. Ted wondered if he could get a level of enchantment that could change the situation for the better. Here he decided to end the stream because if it fails, nothing terrible will happen. But if it succeeds, it cannot be known. After that, he immediately turned to the master for the next improvement. It also went successfully, but the guy wasn't going to end it there. Ted pulled off several more of the same scams. He has already performed 9 successful enchantments. After 8 successful soul seals, this weapon can no longer be transferred to other hands, as all the leading guilds will begin to fight for it due to the success of building strategies around it. There were only 8 such objects in the entire world, and they are worth hundreds of billions. Ted understood that an item with 10 enchantments simply did not exist, but 4 attempts were known and they were unsuccessful. The player's pulse reached 200 and the yoke asked to take a break and come back later. And all because if the pulse increases to 250, the player will be disconnected from the server. The guy tried to calm down and make a decision with a clear head, and he also didn't want to lose Ted even in exchange for luck. He needed a huge level of magic, so even 9 times would not be enough to resist. At the very least, the damage should be 32 times higher. When I took something out of my inventory, a message appeared saying it was prohibited to use. But the character was so dear to him that he decided to put everything he had into it. Ted drank the Berserker potion, and for 10 minutes his neural impulses were increased by 30% and damaged by 20. The item had many negative effects, such as weakening the character's physical control by 80%, causing rage and physical and mental vulnerability. He decided that he had to deal with this, and it would take him about 19 charms. Ted yelled at the master, asking for another boost. But he felt bad about the work he had done, even though the guy shut him up and told him to work. Rage was overwhelming this player's head. But the blacksmith raised the client's spirit and began to continue. The master shouted a spell across the street and began to forge. And then something incredible happened, because it was another success. Ted couldn't believe it, and behind their backs the unimaginable began to happen. An unknown monster appeared who thanked for the long-awaited meeting with his seeker. The whole point was that after the 10th enchantment you became a legend, and you also had the opportunity to enter into a contract with a game entity. The demon immediately began to ask for a blood contract with the guy. But Ted was in no hurry, even though he knew that such an opportunity would come once in a lifetime. And the next moment, something unexpected began to happen. The guy started yelling at the demon, saying that he shouldn't be disturbed while he was doing the enchantment. While he was asking the master to repeat the machinations once again, the creature got angry at him, saying that the man was simply ignorant. Brookshawn yelled and tried to change the man's mind about what was coming. The enchantment was also successful the 11th time, and the demon changed, but did not even have time to finish his speech. After the 12th time, everything was still successful, but the creatures quickly evaporated after each attempt. Even the highest-ranked and level 800 demon disappeared into oblivion. Successful attempts at improvement did not end, and Ifrit already appeared, and Sagaya also appeared, but immediately disappeared. Ted continued to enchant his weapon in every possible way, as if in a daze. The strongest warrior appeared at level 16, the silver dragon at level 17, and the ruler of the seas at level 18, after which the guy decided that this would definitely be the last time he would be enchanted, and asked for another try. The blacksmith agreed to hold the last chance, and at that moment something happened that neither of these two expected. Another enchantment occurred, unsuccessfully breaking the weapon into small pieces, and Ted could not even comprehend it. The effect of the berserk potion wore off, and the realization of what had happened began to dawn. The guy couldn't even comprehend that the work they had done had been unsuccessful. But he had wanted this destruction from the very beginning? Although it was very painful for him, in the end he screamed and asked for his 18 plus the charms that were received earlier to be returned. Ted roared and asked for his precious musket with huge buffs to be returned to him. The blacksmith could only thank the boy for this opportunity and for his thorough improvements in his business. He also spoke about the fortune that accompanied them throughout this long journey. But Ted's pain was enormous, and he wanted to beat up the master for being happy about this outcome of events. He began to realize that the weapon was broken, and now nothing could be changed. And the master with whom he did this became the god of blacksmithing, which made the guy stop understanding what was happening even more. Brahman, through awakening, gained the ability to restore weapon fragments. He was also given an additional enchantment as a result of the repair. And Ted could not believe that someone would be given such an opportunity. But they explained to him that despite receiving such power, it cannot be used whenever one wants. The main reason is that it contradicts all the laws of nature, and most likely such an opportunity will only arise 2 or 3 times. But Brahman still decided to try to restore the boy's expensive musket. Everything went successfully, just like the 19th enchantment, after which the blacksmith thanked him for the opportunity to create such a musket. Ted couldn't believe what was happening and immediately opened the status window to check if he had imagined it. The system reported a basic boost and the need to sign a contract with Shamchan. Soul Seal allowed one to ignore shooting skills and shooting defense by 90%. It was not a mistake attack, and the range increased 30 times, and additional functions appeared. Everything was 3 times higher than the American Guild with a level 9 rocket launcher. Here he remembered that his weapon was a musket, and its firepower should be doubled. As he began to examine everything in more detail, he was even more amazed, because he had never seen a single weapon with 6 slots before. Now Ted's tears were happiness. He looked at facing both guilds alone because of such luck, and he also realized that he could possibly fulfill his dream and get the first rank. While I was thinking, something strange started to happen. The guy couldn't understand what was happening. The world began to shake during his conversations with the blacksmith. A semblance of an eye appeared, which announced that it was the liberator of the sun, Shamchan. The master said that the sealed soul apparently decided to look at the one with whom it would make a deal. But the creature said that before concluding the contract, he must enter the vessel. Ted didn't understand what it all meant and tried to ask for an explanation. As soon as it began to dawn on him that everything would be done by force, the guy immediately began to try to ask Brahman for help. But the blacksmith only said goodbye to him and wished him luck in all his endeavors. He began to curse the gaming world for such antics. The hole that had formed earlier began to quickly tighten around him. The place he found himself in was very dark and looked more like space. The system reported receiving a new quest, which was to gain approval from the Tomb of Paradise. Ted was thinking about what was happening, namely, whether he would be able to use a weapon of such power after completing the quest. Memories overtook him, even though everything seemed like free cheese in a mousetrap. The guy understood that there was no turning back and he had to risk everything. So he accepted the challenge. Ted's mouth remained tied and all he could do was wait. He appeared in the cloud space and assumed that this could be paradise. He was amazed by such a huge amount of space. Starting to look around, he realized that everything around him was not so rosy. After all, these were the corpses of a huge number of monsters. A copy of him appeared in front of Ted, telling him that this place was the tomb of paradise, and that it was in this place that the six-pointed star was received. The guy couldn't understand how the copy had exactly the same equipment and appearance. Anyone who fought for a star of such magnitude must rise from the lowest depths to the highest peaks. Such power is not for the weak. Ted, despite his misunderstanding, knew that he simply needed to win, and to do that, he needed to fight. It seemed to him that everything was not so scary, but the enemy was already preparing to attack, which stunned the guy. The creature moved so fast that Ted didn't even have time to react to everything that was happening. But at that moment, the copy stopped. He was genuinely curious if a human could challenge. They were already very close to each other, but how would the battle go? Ted, seeing Shamchan's movements, immediately realized that this was the use of one of his own movement skills, namely, 1,000 steps. It was a passive skill that increased the range of the first step taken at the start of a battle. Here the guy began to understand that in reality it was not only the appearance that was transferred, but also all the skills and combos. Pointing his weapon at the double, he decided to fight for acceptance no matter the cost. Ted began to use 3 skills at once in the upcoming attack, namely weapon enchantment and trap. The mood was so serious that he stopped being bothered by many of the things he had to experience. The only desire was to show the difference between the clone and the original. Before he could even make one attack, his cloak was already pierced by a bullet. The battle took place extremely quickly, but Ted was not fazed by this and continued to attack. The guy noticed a shadow trace coming from his double under his feet. A barrage of shots immediately fell upon him, but he managed to dodge each attack. Even though luck was on Ted's side, the skills and levels were the same. The bad thing was that he still gave up the initiative in battle to his double. He didn't dwell too much on his thoughts and decided to continue the battle without paying much attention to the scratch. Shadow remained in observation and waited for further action. Looking around tensely, he waited for Ted to take action. Here he heard what was happening very close by and quickly reacted. The guy was preparing to attack the double, and from the side of Shamchan, it looked like a hidden silhouette behind the haze. Shadow thought it was an unoriginal trick that was unlikely to help, but Ted had a completely different plan. Something unusual began to happen in front of the double. Everything began to be filled with blue light. But it wasn't that simple. Because Shamchan knew all the skills and levels very well, he was more interested in whether the guy would survive this battle. Ted, on the contrary, was irritated by the fact of such enormous talkativeness. Despite the continuous attacks, none of them hit the double, and he still had not seen his opponent. The Shadow said that he was simply being forced to end the battle in one shot, and just as quickly he directed the attack at Ted's approximate location, who at that very moment was diligently dodging. Everything happened so quickly that my thoughts were even a little confused. Namely, the double had already caught up with his opponent, being in close contact with Ted, intending to quickly end this battle. But at that very moment, Shamchan noticed something strange. Here he realized that in fact all this was just a trap. Shadow quickly realized that he had been lured to this place on purpose. It seemed to him that it was all just because of the hope of catching them off guard. Shamchan screamed that this was definitely not enough for victory. The double was going to destroy all the shelters in order to reveal the location. He started to destroy everything just to find the guy. He said that hiding and deceiving does not mean success in battle. Ted was just dodging the huge haze at the battle site. The double had already gotten very close to the guy, who apparently fell. The legs of one of the opponents were tied with an unusual thread. Shamchan was tied up on all his limbs, and then he realized that this was another trap. It only took Ted a moment to end the battle, because this time he managed to develop such a method without using skill, relying on physical strength. This method was called Field of Vision, and almost everything was completed. It was then that the double understood everything that was happening. It turns out that the guy had been deliberately giving away his location the entire time, and all this was just so that he would be open to a shot. Now Ted was already very close to his opponent, who was completely immobilized. Then something completely unexpected happened. The double also smiled and said that the guy really did make an excellent vessel. At this moment, Shamchan announced that he was finally ready to sign a contract with the guy. At that moment, Ted woke up in his previous place of residence in fear of real death. The blacksmith reported that he had finally waited for his client to wake up and was now calm. The system sent a notification about the successful completion of the test, and the reward was the conclusion of a contract with Shamchan. Now the guy was happy because the weapon could be used to its full plus 19 plus. Ted roared and said that he had been saving up such luck throughout his life and hoped that failures would stop haunting him. But the system also notified about the beginning of the rebirth. Here the guy could not believe in the reality of the creature's last words that spoke of rebirth from the ashes of hell. His eyes expressed fear and confusion about what would happen to him next. But the rebirth involved completely shedding his existing equipment and skills, which Ted didn't want. Everything that he developed over the course of 10 years of his life. He tried in every way to stop throwing off the titles and curses he had received. But Ted tried in every way to equip himself with what the system did not allow due to the low level. But the game notified about receiving the title by concluding a contract with Shamchan, and also that the process of rebirth is complete. New information was received about the player's status, namely that he had reached level 1, and the profession was newbie. It was a pain for the guy because he would have to start all over again. The blacksmith, who was watching what was happening, was interested in what had happened to the traveler. And then immediately, a notification came about a forced shutdown because the pulse exceeded 250 beats per minute. The blacksmith was even afraid of such a quick disappearance of Fortune's favorite. Realizing that the guy had simply returned to his world, he became upset at the failure to express his gratitude for enlightenment. His decision was sound. He decided to travel like a random traveler in the hope of meeting him in the future, leaving a reminder. With his hammer left at the meeting place, he thanked the guy who allowed him to understand his skills and go on a quest for knowledge. The guy woke up in the real world, crawling out of the virtual reality cube completely exhausted, but anger over the loss of an account with a huge boost. Ted cried and did not understand such injustice towards his work. At this point, the company was discussing whether it was possible to enchant weapons more than 10 times. For them, this seemed at least unattainable for another 5 or 6 years. But they believed that using reinforcements was not entirely correct. They were also interested in whether people would be able to enchant more than 15 times in 10 years, and the chances of that were very high. The company understood that any new content would be passed at high speed, but they were informed that there was a man who enchanted his weapon 19 times. They didn't understand how big the chance of such luck was, and they were also worried that the entire balance of the game could break right there. Ted logged into the game and was convinced that everything that had happened recently was not a joke. His character was completely without weapons and equipment. It hurt him that all the progress he had made over the past 10 years had been lost. He wasn't embarrassed by the fact that he lost his level, rather it was the loss of titles and skills that hurt. But then he realized that the musket was enchanted for 19 plus, and it would be easier to level up with it. Now he was rather happy, because he had the most powerful weapon in the game and he could instantly return everything. But the first thing he decided to do was eat, since he had spent almost a day in the game. His gaze caught on something unusual. He noticed a letter in his front door that definitely wasn't there yesterday. I decided to take a look at what was inside, but suddenly there was just a mistake with the door. These were some documents that he spent a very long time reading. His expression changed with each sheet and the confusion increased. But with every word he read, he began to get more and more angry at what was written. At the same time, Manhwa reported to the master about the successful deletion of the character. It was also clarified whether everything went well with an affirmative answer, and the confirmation was the failed tracking spell. The main thing was not just a failed spell. Everything was checked and the character no longer existed. While the candle was burning, the magician explained that the guy was able to figure out how to tame bosses. Lanhua reported casting an oblivion spell, but he didn't think it would help in any way. Then another voice was heard which said not to be afraid of such things. Huang Jiwi only said that no one would believe him now, even if he said such things, and all because the guild never harmed anyone. For humans, the trading ships were destroyed because a sea dragon simply met them on the way. And those who died in the Orochi raiding died only because of low-ranking players who miscalculated their strength. Huang Jiwi reported that such a coincidence of circumstances happens every time, so no one would be able to prove their involvement in the events, and the magician decided not to worry about this scum anymore. Then the girl turned to the master and asked what was bothering him so much. They still didn't give him any peace, which made him very angry. Even though they knew that the rules of the game would be revised, they still managed to destroy the guy from both sides. The documents were indeed sent to the guy, but out of anger they were all already lying on the floor. The whole thing was that he received a notification about freezing his account due to an upcoming trial. This decision was made due to copyright infringement. Although the guilds tamed the bosses, he did not understand why these trials began. But then he noticed that the court date had not yet been set, and then he began to understand that in fact their goal was not to win, but to make the guy bankrupt. He was already starting to think about actually handing over all the documents to the public domain and exposing everyone. But he knew that the guilds would be able to pull the strings and decide everything from behind the scenes. Here, Ted began to realize that no one knew about the enchantment of weapons, and because of the rebirth, all the curses had fallen. His decision was final. Since they were going to war against him, he would make it a war. The guy understood that now everything was only in his hands, and he would decide all of this in the game. The first thing he did when he entered the game was decide that he shouldn't show himself so openly. For these reasons, he decided to use a bear disguise, and his nickname was not so rare. But his tears still haunted him, and he had to sell a lot just for his own survival. Here his attention was drawn to a familiar object. It was Brahman's hammer, but why did it remain in that place? Ted was given a letter of thanks and a message about the master heading off to gain experience and knowledge, and asked to drop in when he had time to see that gray. While he was thinking that it would really be worthwhile to look into the blacksmith after leveling up, his attention was drawn to movement in the bushes. He was even a little scared, but it turned out to be an ordinary rabbit, namely the first level horned rabbit. Ted thought that a level 19 enchantment should reveal itself immediately. The attack hit the target right on target, and the guy was already overjoyed, thinking that the weapon had no effect. But at that very moment, the rabbit, almost crying, turned to Ted, and then everything became more and more incomprehensible. The guy couldn't believe that he couldn't kill even a level 1 monster in one shot. For some reason, he can't do anything with such a cool weapon and started looking for the problem. The gain should increase as Shamshan's level increases, and all skill spheres could be evolved up to 4 times. Here he realized that it would be enough to just increase his level, and he considered the description of skills to be cheating. The sphere was an item that allowed the use of skills that could not be acquired within the class, which meant that the guy had the opportunity to pump up any skill to the maximum. Ted liked that with such power, he had the opportunity not only to wipe the guild into the dirt, but also to soar to the top of the rankings. While the rabbit ran away in fear and with a small injury, the guy only burst into hysterical laughter with happiness. But he immediately began to understand that he needed to get a profession, and before that, he should level up a bit more. Ted headed to Deep Eagle Forest, where the recommended level was 10 and above. Even though he expected calm battles with monsters, everything was not so easy. There were many battles in these places, and there were many players who fought with some terrible monster. They were arguing about how to defeat it. The mage ran and said that his mana was exhausted, and now he was distracted by the team's defense. But then they were both shocked by what happened right in front of their faces. Namely, one character from their team died and was already evaporating from this world. The tanking knight was exhausted from fear when he realized what was happening. But as soon as he turned around, he also noticed that his magician was missing. Now he knew for sure that he had to get out of this place as quickly as possible. But an attack fell on him from behind, to which he did not have time to react and was knocked down. Or to be more precise, it was precisely the missing magician who also disappeared. Having decided to look at what was happening, he saw a bird flying by that was causing everyone problems. This eagle confidently flew towards the tank with clearly bad intentions. The Eagle Forest was so named because of the huge number of birds of this class, which were the main ones in it. At the same time, someone was shooting at the birds from a long distance. Namely, it was Ted, who was diligently returning to his level. All this time, he was in a tree camouflage, which allowed him to remain unnoticed. His current guy level has already increased to 7th. Despite such a low level, the damage per shot already exceeded 300 units, which he considered cheating. Here he noticed someone's shrill screams and decided to look back. Behind him stood a huge haze coming from the depths of the forest. Ted decided to go and check what was going on there. Before he went to that place, he remembered that a white-necked eagle lived in that place, which just at that moment was flying over the guy's head. The thing was that this creature attacked everyone indiscriminately. Even if it was full, it did not leave its victim. Despite the fact that the eagle did not have good health, he attacked from above with high mobility. He also understood that aggression and speed were on his side and did not give the newcomers any peace. Ted remembered how much trouble this eagle had caused him in the past, and how he had then taken it out on the pigeons of the real world. Now the guy decided to start a raid on this creature. He prepared for the attack, considering it retribution for the past. Orlin, in turn, did not suspect anything yet and continued to attack the newcomers. Preparing for his next attack, he quickly began to close the distance. But then a shot was heard from the side, who was able to hit the eagle in the wing, which made it squeal. Not understanding who could carry out such an attack, the creature began to look around and search for an enemy. But his wing was not a little damaged, which caused him pain, and also his entire speed was reduced. However, the eagle was not going to give up so easily and was preparing to launch a counterattack, although the place from which the shot was fired was already empty. While the bird was looking for its enemy, another shot hit it from a different location. The second wing also suffered in the battle. The predator was already flying up to the log, which most often plays the role of a weapon in the eagle's paws. Grabbing the log that was closest, he decided to continue, searching for the one who dares to inflict such huge injuries on him. But at the moment of flight, another shot hit it, landing in the paw, and the log fell out. One of the eagle's fingers was knocked off by a precise attack. But it didn't end there. Almost immediately, a shot was fired at the wing. And right after that, a third shot was heard, unaimed, in the tail. Orlin was amazed by what was happening. The shrill squeals of birds could be heard throughout the forest. The creature was already missing all its fingers. Its wings were riddled with holes from the shots. The guy began to move towards his victim, but was in no hurry. Ted decided to make fun of the eagle for the past, and he also liked that with each attack the level of stealth increased. The bird trembled in fear at the sight of the weapon and its opponent. The battle was over and the bird definitely stopped suffering from its injuries. The guy sat and wondered whether the 22 wings he got from the eagle would recoup the cost of the cartridges. Now he could definitely rest peacefully since the quota for today had been met. He decided to go on a journey to get his class and went to the place of his past. It was a musketeer academy called Shibboleth. A long time ago, he was offered to be a student of the head of this academy, but at that time he refused. As soon as he knocked, the doors opened for him with a not very favorable look. Ted immediately began to say that he would like to receive the musketeer class, but Raiden, who was considered the strongest specialist, appeared in front of him. The guy understood that his level was higher than 500 and decided that it was worth telling about himself. Despite the fact that it was a new head, he refused Ted, asking him to go elsewhere, since they were not hiring students yet. He did not understand how this was possible because Shibboleth personally invited him and the misunderstanding increased. The guy didn't understand why the master had suddenly changed since he had recently offered him to study with him. Raiden reported that such news did not concern the traveler and asked him to leave. Ted explained that he was a candidate for the Baron's apprentice in the past and he wanted to know what happened. The man began to get angry and did not understand who was standing in front of him. The guy began to tell that in the past, due to circumstances, he declined the invitation, remaining on friendly terms with Shibboleth. The master grabbed him by the collar and called Ted a scoundrel. Raiden didn't understand who was in front of him and why they were talking nonsense to him. Although the guy was frightened by such aggression, he simply did not understand what this man was talking about. The whole point was that Mr. Shibboleth had disappeared several years ago, and if they had really been on friendly terms, he should have known about it. It was then that Ted realized that he had missed a lot. But how could the Baron have disappeared? They kicked him out thinking that people sent him to spy on him, and if he continues, Raiden will finish him off personally. The master said that if he heard one more lie or the name of his master, he would rip out the boy's tongue and ensure a long death. Ted did know the previous manager, but he never valued his connections. He just didn't like the fact that a stranger treated him so badly. But he didn't plan to give up so easily and decided to take a big step. He mentioned the 40 exam, which he had personally taken in the past, and the master stopped. Ted assumed that if the master spoke like that about the Baron, then he was his junior, and therefore assumed that this exam was still being held. At that moment, Raiden really understood that the guy had already been trained in this place and was coming again and considered it illogical. The guy simply asked to give him the opportunity to test himself during the exam. An exam of this type was only held at this academy and was created by Shibboleth out of boredom. Ted asked if the essence of the exam, which consisted of hitting gold coins with a bullet from 10 meters, had changed. The man immediately realized that he had actually studied in this place, but he could not believe that the Baron was offering to become his student. The guy said that he could back up his words with actions, and as a result, he would get the class he wanted so much. He was invited to come in and wait while the examination ground was prepared. Ted was upset that Mr. Shibboleth was not there, but he understood that for passing the exam, he would be given the skill 1,000 steps. It was a passive skill that increased the range of the first step taken at the start of a battle, and the range in turn increased due to the percentage of the musketeer class. The guy needed this skill due to the chosen class, which required high mobility and distances, namely for future leveling and acquiring skills. Here he noticed something painfully familiar in this place, namely the gunsmith Ronoro, who was in charge of affairs at the academy. He decided to come up and say hello, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. But Ted was simply ignored, as if he hadn't even been noticed. The guy started to think about the reasons why they still didn't recognize him, and assumed that it was all because of the bear's face. But the master was already raising his voice at him. Ted saw the training ground and realized that it had become more battered, and assumed that the reward for completing it might have changed as well. But he definitely made the decision that he was obliged to check it personally and took a position. The guy was distracted a little more, thinking about where the Baron could have gone. The master said that, to be fair, the guy would be given a musket from the armory, and also decided to repeat the rules of the exam. From a standing start, you had to hit 10 coins in 10 seconds from a distance of 10 meters. As soon as the gunsmith gave him the gun, the master informed him that Ted could commit the crime as soon as he was ready. But as soon as the guy took the musket in his hands, he noticed something unfair. Namely, the sight on the weapon was knocked off, which could prevent him from successfully completing the mission. He knew for sure that quality weapons were part of the exam, and now it could not be considered fair. He tried to call Ronoro, but he didn't respond at all. Now it all became clear to Ted. He was given such a weapon on purpose. Raiden started to tease the guy because he said that he would easily pass the exam and did not understand where all the enthusiasm had gone. The guy asked to solve one small issue before starting. He pointed his musket in the other direction and was ready to pull the trigger. And this particular shot was intended for the gunsmith, who was immediately seized with fear. The master immediately took out his weapon, not understanding why Ronoro was attacked. The most important argument was the barbaric behavior within the walls of the academy. But as he thought about it, he began to realize that Ted was aiming straight at the gunsmith's head, because when aiming from such a distance, the bullet didn't hit the head. This could mean only one thing, namely a malfunction of the musket, which he immediately proposed to correct by replacing the weapon. But then something completely unexpected began to happen. The guy had already analyzed everything in his head and calculated that the error on the left was 15 and on the top 27. This means that he only needs to aim to the right and below to hit the targets. The master was amazed that Ted was hitting the targets even with the sights off. After all the shots were finished, it was said that exactly 10 seconds had passed. The guy asked if they liked the work they had done and if it was worthy of the highest score. Raiden responded with surprise. And it wasn't just about good shooting. The whole point was that the reload time of the explosive engraving inside the musket was 1 second. This means that even one misfire of 1/10 of a second will delay the shooting time. The master realized that Ted knew about this and calculated everything so that each bullet hit the second. It seemed to Raiden that this guy definitely couldn't be a newbie without a class, but he still praised him for passing successfully, saying that he had never seen such a person. He understood why the gentleman was interested in this person and said that he would immediately prepare everything for the change of class. Ted was pleased and thanked him for his words, saying that he expected quick work, but in reality the guy wasn't that calm, and all because the last coin was constantly fluttering in the wind and he barely touched it. He knew he would have been consumed with shame if he had failed the exam and blamed it all on the wind. But he really didn't need to do everything with such pathos. But now he decided to complete another task and captured Ronoro. Ted asked why the gunsmith pretended not to remember him. He remembered that this was exactly the same sight that he was given last time during the exam. It was then that Ronor gave in, saying that he hated the guy because his master had disappeared because of him. The Baron really wanted to get Ted as his student since their academy was on the verge of closing, but he brazenly refused this request. This is why Shiboli decided that the problem was in him and that he should strive for greater mastery, after which he disappeared. Ted wondered if this was really a reason to give him a broken musket, but the gunsmith simply replied that he couldn't sit idly by even though he knew it wouldn't prevent him from passing the exam. He believed that the guy in the past was the master's only hope, but he treated him heartlessly. But then Ted finally realized that all this was done only because the Baron had done a lot for the gunsmith in the past. I also understood that he was always more interested in the rating and not in receiving additional training. He tried to apologize to Ronar, but he said that it was not necessary and asked if the guy would leave them just like last time, immediately after receiving the class. And all because he wanted to convey something to Ted, which he did. The guy couldn't understand what it was, but then Ronar began to explain that the master had asked him to give this to him if he returned, although in the old man's opinion he did not deserve it at all. Ted understood that the gunsmith, despite his anger towards him, still wanted to fulfill the will of the master, and after all, emotions and feelings are also embedded in game characters. Ronar spoke about the fact that the guy might meet a gentleman on his journey and asked to convey that everyone was eagerly awaiting his return to the academy. He still asked the old man for forgiveness once again, but he said that he had screwed up himself and asked him to take his leave. Left alone with himself, He still wanted to know what kind of gift it would be. And all because the Baron was a very mischievous person, and it was very strange to see a gift from him. Ted began to open the gift he had received. His eyes immediately sparkled with surprise, but what was there? Despite this, for everyone, his facial expression did not change due to the suit he arrived in. He continued to watch for a long time and simply did not see the light in his eyes. It was a D-rank single skill realm. Ted considered this a great stroke of luck and was clearly happy to receive such a gift. The whole point was that the spheres contained skills that were not found in the standard skill tree. But the guy also understood that even weak skills could be developed very quickly with his title. It also turned out that a single skill in combination with the 6-pointed star could be developed in a way that had never happened before. Ted thanked the Baron and happily hurried to activate the skill. This sphere allowed the summoning of 3 goblins for 30 minutes, initially at level 30, but it could be increased through hunting. At first, the guy couldn't understand what this unnecessary thing was. But in reality, what bothered him most was the fact that these were the weakest mobs in the game. He was looking for something else, but he didn't think that there really was only one sphere there. Ted did find one more thing in the box, namely a letter that said, Shibboleth didn't really intend to leave him anything worthwhile, but he did it because he thought it was good revenge for the guy simply leaving the academy. And the Baron also said that if Ted has any complaints, they will wait for him in the city of Ash Sky. Here the guy experienced all the anger of the world for such revenge, although it was wrong on his part to leave. But he definitely decided that as soon as he met Shibboleth, he would kick his ass. The next destination was the Plains of Sauron, where the recommended level was 20 and above. At the same time, a battle between monsters and the team was taking place on the field. The tank was yelling at his mage, asking why he wasn't attacking, and the girl at that moment was asking him not to distract her, and was generally saying that she had already healed the guy many times. Then a bullet flew at the monster, which was definitely meant for him. They were shocked by such a sniper shot, and the girl didn't like that something stole their experience. While the team below looked around and tried to figure out who it was, a musket was sticking out of the trees. Ted had already forgotten how much time he spent in this place, but his level increased to level 59. Although it didn't hurt him to level up, he was exhausted by the assigned task. He was now officially assigned the Musketeer class, and also had access to 2 passive skills as a graduate of Shibboleth Academy. But before he even left the exam site, he remembered that the master shook the boy by the shoulders and asked him to do something as a student of the academy. But Ted tried to explain that he just wanted to get a class and go about his business. Raiden actually started begging him to visit the Plains of Sauron. It was enough for him to just visit them when he was passing by. Ted knew that this location was for the lower and middle levels, but he didn't understand why he had to visit it while helping the academy and the Baron. The whole point was that quite recently, people started to complain about an incomprehensible black cloud. He was only asked to obtain any useful information about this cloud. It was after these words that the system displayed a message about a new available task and asked whether it was accepted. The guy decided to put forward his condition, namely that he wants a hybrid class for himself, and it will need to be presented to the Thieves Guild. Ted knew that such classes do not have academies, which is why their craft is difficult to learn, but thieves have something that will be useful in the future. The master said that it wouldn't be that difficult, so while he contacts the clan, the guy can look for information. So after that, they shook hands and the task was also accepted. Despite the fact that the anger towards Boron was enormous, he had no idea what the city of Ash Sky was, and perhaps he would be able to find it during the quests. But Ted decided not to think about it for now, but to move gradually. He decided to continue hunting monsters and already took aim at one. True, the very next second a man with a sword attacked this same creature. Guy, let's remember this happened not for the first time. But who are these people? Here, having observed more closely, he realized that these were streamers, because there were cameras next to them. What Ted didn't like most was that he personally had to stop broadcasting because of the threats that were coming in, which is why he's currently stuck in this place. The guy tried to calm down and not try to take out his anger on these people and understood that he would not get anything from killing the players, but would only ruin his reputation. He aimed at the next monster, knowing that he had one last mob left until level 60. But then his sight was blocked by something huge, and he didn't understand where it had disappeared to. Although Ted didn't understand where he had disappeared to, he wasn't scared at all. A huge inflatable doll appeared before him. The guy didn't understand why this was happening exactly when he was hunting, because he was using all sorts of entertainment stuff for broadcasts, and was already thinking about squashing them. Ted immediately drove away such thoughts from himself, considering that he was above this and thought that the most important fact was reaching level 60. But these dolls became more and more numerous, but they did not stop appearing. It was then that he realized that he had spoken too loudly before. His anger began to cross all boundaries, and he already considered these dolls to be dummies. At this time, the team of stream hosts thanked their viewers for donations. He pointed a monster at the camera and said that he would arrange a bloodbath for this. But then the camera began to lose connection, and it was not noticeable what happened to the doll itself. The other two began to discuss why their friend had burst, suspecting that he had simply been pierced by a monster and had died. Although at the same second, two other dolls burst as well. At this moment, the dolls began to understand that something strange was happening, and one of them noticed a sniper. But they started to panic because they had been on the plane all this time, and one of them suggested getting out of the inflatable dolls. The level increased to 65, but for killing players, the crime index increased to 700 units. Ted was just happy to get rid of the annoying insects. The tracking company knew the level was above 150, and the penalty for dying in the game was a 1-week ban. But the office was stunned. The guy kept track of all the data and thought the crime rate would be higher, but was happy to see it was lower. Now he had access to the additional status, Vigilance, which enhanced vision, and the system asked whether the player wanted to use it. This was indeed a very useful status for Ted, and especially for his class. He was already overwhelmed with emotions from the new ability, and he wanted to continue as soon as possible. He immediately began to attack the monsters and the remaining streamers from the team. Ted himself did not expect that such a status would allow him to increase the damage from an attack so much. And then he realized that he didn't care at all about anything while the experience points were dripping. But then something appeared in front of him that he did not expect. At that moment, someone could not understand how the entire group from the first sector was destroyed. The person reporting this incident apologized to the head of the department, and he asked how they couldn't recognize the killer and why they couldn't see him. The guy was scared and said that everything happened so quickly that they assumed it was a long-range sniper. And because the first sector was a plane, the players were unable to dodge. The player killings were not that simple. The master assumed that it would be a deliberate attack and began to think which team this person was from. Thinking that his level was at least 400, he decided to pass something in a bag to his subordinate. He immediately understood what it was and was amazed. The master explained that whoever this person was, he was a threat to their plans, so they definitely needed to use him. Most of the Japanese players settled in the Kingdom of Karen, and the plains of Sauron were the largest hunting grounds for newcomers. Ted was just heading to Sauron's county. He initially didn't want to run back and forth, so he decided to come here after completing Raiden's mission. And all because he could get something else and he was interested in what it was. Now he had access to the new skill Mosquito Bullet. But since the crime index was high, 10% of the health bonus was taken away. Ted was amazed that he was also given the title Sharp Sniper, but he had never seen anything like that before, although the Mosquito Bullet skill still became available to him. But then he realized that the developers could have easily introduced it for people like the guy who killed 10,000 mobs in 10 days. The essence of the skill was that the health of the target affected by the mosquito was transferred to the player, and due to the level of mastery, synchronization increased. The Mosquito Bullet's damage was 10% of the player's damage, and the absorption rate was 50% of the damage, and the guy was amazed by these ratios. Here he began to remember that he now had about 8,000 damage, which means that with 5% health, in one hit he can heal about 400 points. He mocked maliciously that this made up half of his health at the moment. Now Ted realized that he didn't have to worry about such things at all. 2 spears appeared in front of his face, and the system reported that the guards did not trust the guy because of his high crime rate. It was then that he realized that he couldn't just get into the place and decided to try to leave the place very quietly. Ted decided not to stick his neck out that much for now, at least while the index was that high. He heard someone being called to stop and began to look around. The guy noticed that some guys detained someone and explained that if he made even one mistake, he would lose all the items. They held something in front of the frightened boy's face and laughed at him. It was a magical book of the outcast that allowed to forcibly reveal part of the player's information. Processing began. There was a standard set of information, namely name, level, profession, and crime index. The man was upset by the weakness and told him to get lost before he was killed, which is what the boy did. His partner immediately said that it would be useless, but the second one didn't like it either, and the reason for this was the moment when someone couldn't see their killers. Here they noticed someone standing very close, namely the guy standing at the gate, but his subordinate said that it was useless because they inspect every second person. Ted heard that they had some scrolls that revealed information about the player, and now he thought that these guys were from the leading guilds. They were still discussing the moment of the appearance of such a person, but they only knew that he would appear today. The guy decided that he should quickly get out of here, But he knew for sure that if these were people from big guilds, there would be a huge group here. But then he crashed into someone, or rather he was knocked down, trying to apologize for not looking at the route and being distracted by the map. As he started asking if Ted was okay, he noticed something, and he grabbed the guy by the shoulder, and he in turn became very scared. The man noticed his weapon and became very interested. Ted was so scared and thought that he had believed in his disguise in vain. He thought that they had come specifically for his head. Although the next question that came up was whether he was a fan of Ted, which left the guy in a stupor. He was so happy to meet a fellow fan and said that a lot of money and effort had gone into making such an exact copy of the weapon. It was then that Teddy realized that he could tell everyone in the future that this musket really was just an exact copy of the original weapon. Although a passing traveler told the guy that it would be better for him not to linger in this place. That's when the game began. He started asking for reasons why this shouldn't be done and what actually happened. The traveler asked whether he knew about the Special Offensive Paprika group or not. He understood that when he streamed, he wasn't interested in other streamers and responded by saying that he only watched Ted's work. That's when the guy said that this was a guild that gained popularity due to its peculiar content. They could make criminals out of game characters on their broadcasts using fake evidence or eat certain parts of monsters for donations. That's when Ted realized that these weren't some kind of streamers, but just a bunch of freaks. The traveler said that they had recently been broadcasting on the plains and were shot by some musketeer. At that moment, the guy realized that they were talking specifically about him. Because of this, the head of the guild took this as a declaration of war and is now hunting that boy. Ted began to quickly turn his head and say that he had not seen anyone. And the traveler explained that there was no one except the guild members, and that was precisely the reason why the criminal had not been caught. And those people just continued to interrogate ordinary people, although they themselves considered it a waste of time. The guy began to think that his lucky period had already ended and he should raise his level. But he also knew that if everything continued like this, other guilds would not stay away. It was then that the traveler remembered that he wanted to explain why he shouldn't stay in this place. Yesterday, one of the guilds was attacked in this place, after which a huge battle broke out. These two guilds were already in conflict, and this incident served as a trigger, since some were convinced that the others had sent snipers. And due to the unexpected attack, the guild suffered huge losses, although they usually maintained order with such knights. But even they were not ready for something like this. But at that very second, Ted decided to simply exit the server. The guy started thinking that he said something wrong. He was worried that the only player with similar tastes would not want to continue communicating with him. Here he was noticed by those young men who were examining the passers-by and became interested in him. They were wondering if he was really the mercenary that the master hired, but the traveler did not understand why they came out to meet him. They reported that he had already inquired about his arrival, and at that moment the guy remembered that he had completely forgotten to call him. The observers said that the master placed great hopes on him because of the great responsibility of the mission, but he did not inspire confidence in them. He immediately decided to call the gentleman and inform him that he had successfully arrived at the place. The traveler wondered if he just needed to get rid of the target, but he was told not to do anything for now because the subordinate had been given a magic bag and he could handle it himself. The guy accepted the order and disconnected the call. This was the strongest Moonlight Musketeer named Lone, level 551 and ranked 231. Ted decided to look for information about Paprika's attack group, but he wasn't interested in stream recordings or channel news. He was looking for a fight in which the guild participated. They were already not on the best terms, and this situation finally exacerbated their conflict. Special Pa stated that it was Nightwalker who started killing streamers first. It was also reported that many from the Ringleaders Guild suffered. Ted was amazed that they didn't provoke further conflict over their code by simply backing down. The guy couldn't understand why he always created a big problem by doing something insignificant. They burned each other's flags thinking that these were special attacks. Ted didn't understand whether he should contact the Ranker Guild Nightwalker, which was under the leadership of his brother. He looked at the computer screen and continued to think whether to call or not. I just couldn't decide to take such a huge step. Their family was not so close-knit, everyone was against him. And at the last meeting, he yelled at the whole family. Ted may have called it all a hassle, but he simply had no choice. He decided to start the call after all, and the mouse was already pointed at the call button. The older brother was glad to hear from Kehei and was surprised that he called first, and he could only ask how he was doing. He picked up the phone while in the game and was clearly not in an aggressive mood. Even though the brother was the master of his guild and it took a lot of time, he did not try to complain about it, and also said that mom and dad were very happy for Ted and watched the broadcast. Kehei agreed with everything and immediately decided to get down to business by asking whether he knew anything about the Paprika Special Offensive Group or not. The brother's face suddenly changed, and he thought for a few seconds. Despite the tense question, he replied that he had heard about them and asked Ted if they had harmed him. The guy didn't know how to properly start a conversation on this topic. But still, I started the conversation by saying that I met them on the plane and saw how they intentionally troll new players at the starting location, and their content is clearly not for everyone. My brother said that they also intentionally send their streamers to the county to reduce the number of players. It was then that Kehei began to understand what they wanted to do, and his brother confirmed it. They were preparing to conquer Sauron's county by making it their main base, and if there were many newcomers in this place who would stand in their way during the siege, so they came up with this tactic. It is for these reasons that they began to send their streamers and interfere with ordinary players. They knew that after this, players would definitely not want to stay in such places. So this strategy worked, and there were fewer and fewer players in the county. Now Kehei began to understand such behavior on the part of those he saw. Without even realizing it, he managed to get involved in some hopeless mess. But if the siege begins, it will no longer be possible to enter the county, and he should manage to complete the task. Here, he received a very unpleasant question, namely the question of why he stopped streaming without explanation. His family was worried about him, although Ted wanted to get rid of it by saying that nothing special had happened. The brothers started a conversation about how they hadn't gotten together as a family for a long time. But Kehei immediately interrupted him, so they simply answered that they were ready to wait for his return as long as it took. Despite the fact that this kind of conversation irritated him, he did not become too aggressive towards it. I just wished him good luck in life and thanked him for the information, after which he immediately ended the outgoing call. He didn't understand why he was doing this and considered himself a complete loser. His door was wide open and full of loneliness. But the guy really thought he was too useless and unlucky. Ted really didn't understand why things weren't going so smoothly in his life. He thought that all the shitty things were happening only to him. The guy really thought he was trying his best. But everything wasn't going according to plan. Even if the plan was very successful, at some point, everything started to go against the plan. Although almost immediately he realized that it really wasn't his fault. He was just always at the epicenter of events and suffered. This was his greatest dislike of what was happening. During this time, he witnessed the illegal taming of bosses. Afterwards, he ran into trolls who literally interfered with everyone and everything. So for him, it was a pure provocation. In one moment, he lost everything he had strived for so long, and now he is getting involved in more problems. From that moment on, he decided that this definitely shouldn't concern him anymore. At that moment, he immediately decided to continue his game. So he immediately decided to dive into the virtual reality machine. Ted knew exactly that he just needed to level up to that point. By the time the guilds started taking action, until either of them has time to take the next step, it has already started to appear on the virtual world map. Ted knew for sure that the retribution against them would be at his hands, period. The guy also went to the plains of Sauron, but only to the second zone. Teams that tried to raise their rank sometimes did not expect their own success. Although the opponents in this zone were stronger than in the first zone, many teams understood that in this case they should be dealt with individually. As soon as the guy made the decision to go on his further journey, his words began to blur. And all this happened because he was surrounded by something like gas, and he began to turn into a skeleton. The girl who was on his team started screaming in fear at what was happening. She didn't think that there were monsters on the plane that could literally suck health out of players. The girl was so scared that she didn't know what to do in this situation. And at that moment, Ted received a notification that the mosquito bullet had successfully restored his health. The guy couldn't believe that something so useful existed, namely healing due to damage and even at a distance. This is especially useful in the starting area. But there was one but. It did not aim at the player. He received a notification about the player's murder, and his crime index also increased. He knew that if the index continued to rise, he would definitely not be able to get into the county. The only problem was that he could not control this mosquito. And all this happened because the level of proficiency and synchronization was 0.1%. Now Ted realized that he shouldn't use it in a location with a bunch of players and start leveling up. But his level was already 99, and after the 100th, leveling up becomes very difficult. There was only one way to overcome this barrier, and that was to kill bosses like the three-headed dragon or Inferno Orochi. True, there were no such bosses on the plain of Sauron, although it was logical because this place is the starting location. He will have to go to the nearest area with the boss, or try to complete Raiden's task of running back and forth. He didn't understand what to do, but then he heard screams which almost made him fall. The initial players were shouting that a monster was coming and everyone should run. Ted began to look around and wonder what it was. But looking up at the sky, he saw what everyone was so afraid of. A younger demon appeared in front of him who was definitely not friendly towards them. Although the boy knew that such a creature was summoned by a magic bag, he did not know whether this item was used intentionally. The demon was ready to launch his first attack, for which he had been preparing diligently. He began to pelt passing players with his brutal attacks. The newcomers' teammates and partners evaporated before their faces and they didn't know what to do. But due to enormous fear, they simply could not move, being in a stupor. People who found themselves in such a situation simply tried to escape from this place as quickly as possible. The monsters also tried to avoid any attack on themselves. It was another broadcast, and the person conducting it hoped that the camera would convey everything. He asked the chat if they had fun watching noobs die and also thanked for any donations. The people who arrived with him were shocked that the stingy guildmaster would allow them to use the magic bag, and understood that the matter was truly serious. They discussed the fact that whoever the person was who destroyed the guys last time, he was no match for a level 300 master. But at that very moment, they noticed something unusual. They were interested in what was happening to the demon. He began to spin and look around. Ted was starting to get angry and thought they were starting to ask for trouble, although the guy was going to give them credit for such a gift. He tried to keep his demon opponent in his sights. After all, they so carefully invited the boss to this place just for his sake. The guy successfully launched an attack but was immediately followed by an attack. Ted decided to use the passive skill 1000 Steps and successfully dodged all the explosions. Even though he tried to leave successfully, he thought everything through in his head. Ted understood that the difference in levels was felt very strongly and understood that against a level 300, victory would not be easy. He just knew that he had to keep his distance and not slow down. He also used stealth, which was upgraded to 52%. The demon tried in every way to find his target, but so far he had not succeeded, because of which the creature really began to get angry. Although he tried to find his goal, due to such searches he was stuck for quite a long period. Ted assumed that 5 accurate shots would be enough for him to kill the monster, but for this, it was necessary to choose a suitable cover for such a thing. Then he noticed something flying towards him from the side and looked back. It was something like slime that instantly swallowed the guy up to his head. She disappeared just as quickly, only enveloping him in his clothes. Ted understood that if it weren't for his vision, he would have been left completely without health. He wanted to hide quickly before his stealth level dropped, but the system reported that he had been struck by necrotic poison and had been given the status of being possessed by a restless spirit that would leave his body in 5 minutes. Although it didn't gradually take away health, the status could play a cruel joke. Very quickly, Ted was swept away by some unusually bright light, and apparently it was the spirit. The guy immediately tried to get up and realized what his main problem was. Namely, he already knew that he had been noticed by his enemy. The demon immediately appeared in front of Ted's face with very bad intentions. It was at the moment of close combat that the people who released the demon began to suspect that this man was the sniper they were looking for. At this moment, the newcomers were talking among themselves and thinking that it wouldn't hurt for them to leave this place. Namely, everyone was afraid of getting hit by a hot hand, but at that moment the dried-up body of a player fell in front of them. Everyone was frightened by this outcome of events and did not understand how this was possible. The demon was at the epicenter of events, and there was a fiery haze around them. But at that moment he was hit in the eye with a rather large attack from close range. Ted understood that if there were no healthy people nearby, he would have died from what was happening. The demon was very unhappy to receive such an attack in the eye, and it was definitely seriously damaged. The guy liked that he had the ability to heal, and he knew exactly what a demon couldn't know. He began to like this outcome of events, calling his opponent a gorilla. He was ready to continue the fight. The monster's anger grew exponentially, and he decided to take a more aggressive approach and began to attack very quickly. Ted actually thought that the demon didn't have much health left, and he would need to aim straight at the head, but first somehow distract it. Then something very distracting appeared in front of the guy, namely the camera that was flying very close to him. It was at this moment that the epiphany occurred. He really understood how he could really distract himself, and this would help him. The broadcast host couldn't understand how such a young man remained so tenacious, but he definitely couldn't be screwed this time. He started asking his men how a non-rookie could end up in this place and whether he would die if they waited a little longer. The men told him that he was right and the guy couldn't handle it alone. Then one of the guys stood up and started to go somewhere, and the presenter couldn't understand where he was going. But he said not to panic, but just to see why he got up. In fact, he told everyone that after the death of the newbies, a huge amount of loot remained. Although the rest of the team was scared by this idea, they saw that he was right. He couldn't understand why they would hide and watch, namely, how people simply take away free loot. Although the presenter said that they could use such help, the situation they are in, the use of a skill, namely, 1,000 steps, could be heard above their heads. Everyone was so scared that the only thing they managed to notice was a jump straight into the grass. That's when strange things started to happen. No one could see the person who jumped. Nobody wanted to become a victim of a sniper, but if they didn't manage to hide now, before they could even finish their version, a demon appeared over their heads in a mood of great aggression. They were immediately attacked, and one of them, the only one, managed to hide, from which all his partners considered him an ordinary coward who could do nothing more, and the magician suggested simply squashing the demon. Many thought he was crazy because the magic bag cost 3,000 gold. How was he going to explain this to the leader? They released the monster to find the sniper, who was probably exhausted and hiding. True, while he was explaining everything to the team, one piercing shot flew at them. Now everyone has started to think that they have fallen into a common trap and that they were wrong to get involved in this. The demon attacked one of the frightened boys with his fist, which crushed the poor guy, but the monster was really very aggressive. It was at this moment that the master plan began. Ted began to move forward at great speed between the rocks and caught a wonderful angle, and everything was done for another shot at the demon. Having attacked, he finally managed to inflict considerable damage by knocking off one of the horns. From such an attack, the monster was thrown onto its back and suffered huge losses. It was at this moment that Ted managed to position the musket in such a way that he could handle it in 1 second. The guy said that there was nothing personal about it and he was only doing it for the sake of leveling up. Although for such an outcome of events, he had to run quite a bit. Ted was very exhausted from such a battle, but his current level increased by 5 units, and he still died. Many of those who witnessed this in person were amazed by the fact that an ordinary newbie managed to kill such a monster. That's when the raid began from newbies who wanted to get free loot. But everything was not so simple because of the enormous anger for disrespect. They began to catch bullets in the head. Ted was really angry that the newbies started acting like jackals. The crime index was already 5,400. The guy began to collect his honestly earned loot in huge quantities. Although I only considered the strong belt useful in the entire list, there was also a health potion and fragments of demon claws. Ted understood that if he sold all this, he would get somewhere around 90 gold pieces. But then he noticed another little thing that attracted his attention the most. Namely, a necrotic poison that began to act 5 minutes after application, which could be used 10 more times. Ted decided that this would be a really useful thing, so he took it. Although all this time the guy was worried about something completely different. What exactly are these people from Special Paw going to do next? At the same moment, someone was trying hard to cut the screen that was being displayed out of anger. The guild master couldn't understand why things were going so badly for them and why he still hadn't managed to kill this sniper. Since this guy dealt with the junior demon in just 3 minutes, the master assumed that his level was no lower than 500. He realized that they could not compete with him, and he had to spend a huge amount of money to conquer the county. But they came across such a monster. The master realized that he could no longer simply waste resources in vain. Here he decided to call his backup plan and reported that the younger demon had fallen. Since the musketeer pretended not to understand what was being said, the master began to yell at him to begin carrying out his task. He was informed that he was already on assignment, but if his rate was raised, he would refuse the assignment. The man understood that he was forced to do this in order to fulfill the plan. It was then that the guy realized that he had completely despaired and would report as soon as he arrived in the county. Ted, however, made the decision to head to his next destination, namely to the 3rd zone of the Plains of Sauron. Despite the fact that he had a fairly high level, it was not at all easy for him in this place. The monsters in this place possessed magic and were already more serious opponents. Although he managed to successfully dodge the monsters' attacks, it was definitely not easy for him. At some point they stopped attacking, and all because their enemy disappeared without a trace and they tried to find him. At that moment they noticed a barely noticeable shadow in the dust, after which they immediately sent a huge number of forces to attack this very place. But as soon as the dust cleared, something extraordinary appeared before them. The monsters had no idea what kind of machine or creature it was, but it was at this moment that such a machine began to attack. Ted really didn't like such things at all, or to be more precise, they really irritated him. He hated this place only because there was no cover in this place, which made it very inconvenient to fight. Although, despite such unfavorable circumstances, he managed to go very far. Here Ted realized that very soon someone even more nasty was about to appear. The system reported that the guy was bitten by an angler bird, and also that his stamina had decreased by 1. At that moment, he realized that these creatures had finally appeared. The bite reports kept coming in. Ted felt sorry that his stats were melting away so quickly, but he had no choice because he wanted to get unwavering. It was a special ability that increased defense depending on the damage value, but it only appeared if health dropped to almost 0. This ability was more for tanks who needed higher health, but when enchanted, it was just perfect. Ted understood that after this, no one would be able to kill him, so this would be like a second wind. The player must defeat 99 monsters of the same level as the player and survive with at least 9% health remaining. It wasn't a problem for him to kill that many, but being attacked by that many was torture considering his class. Here, incorporeal birds entered the battle, and it was impossible to find out the level of them without killing them before they were killed. But players hated these creatures because they permanently stole one random stat. This was what was most often frightening, because they could steal everything from attack to intelligence. They deal a fixed amount of damage and, as the name suggests, they circle above you, constantly biting. However, each kill also increased random statistics, but that was not the problem. They were extremely difficult to kill, which is why Ted had a hard time. The conditions for obtaining unwavering have been met. The system reported that the body and spirit, even on the verge of death, withstood all the tests. So this proved his determination, for which he was awarded. The skill was available when the health bar dropped to 10%. The defense would increase by 50%, and it was provided for 7 days. Ted thought that this skill was provided on a permanent basis, and was a little upset about this. He was given a special skill, God's Gift, which only a select few could obtain, but due to his reincarnation, he was not allowed to take it. The guy didn't understand why he could only have 2 special skills. Looking at his statistics, he continued to hate reincarnation, but decided to leave the rest for tomorrow. The first thing he did was decide to improve his health as it was on the brink. At this point, he understood that the mosquito should not be allowed near the players. Its index was already prohibitively high. The mosquito disappeared, but the guy noticed something really strange. His health did not recover, but on the contrary, even declined further. But I still decided to check everything again and released the mosquito. He crashed into one of the birds that were flying everywhere. It was then that Ted realized that the anglers were eating his mosquitoes, which was why his health was declining. Then he began to realize that such birds were incorporeal, so they simply ate mosquitoes like bullets. The guy wanted to play, but he simply wasn't allowed to do so. Although at that very moment the idea came to him to poison these creatures. He decided to discover a necrotic poison in order to test its first application. The guy decided to take a risk and use the mosquito together with the poison, which is what he decided to do. He poured a small amount of poison onto the pool and began to simply watch. Evil spirits began to emanate from every flap of the wings. Ted remained ready to immediately attack the bird. After the first successful kill in this way, the system immediately reported that the guy had successfully defeated the angler bird and his characteristics had increased. It was then that Ted realized that the heat was starting, which he really liked. In this way, he managed to kill quite a few birds and he thanked the demon for this opportunity. It was already past midnight, but he remained in the same place. The car still remained in the same place. But Ted decided that he no longer needed this option, and he didn't want to leave it for others. So the guy decided to destroy it without any way to restore it. After which I immediately decided to open the status window to check my characteristics. He was glad that he had managed to restore 99 status points, and then receive an additional 44. He also managed to improve his mastery of the mosquito bullet. Ted was now able to control the mosquito more successfully. It also became more difficult to swat him, which the guy was also pleased with. The system reported that the mosquito bullet's health was 100 health points, and the damage was more than 1,000. Ted understood that he should move on to the 4th zone, but the strange clouds were still not visible, so he would steadily level up. The guy was clearly very tired, and at that moment he noticed something strange. He noticed the moon, which seemed to look more unusual, but in fact in the past, he never paid much attention to the moon in this location. The ground beneath his feet seemed to start to blaze at once. The guy noticing this could not understand what was happening and was even a little scared. An explosion went off beneath him that was aimed at killing Ted. These were the 2 guys who were questioning ordinary people near the entrance, and they thought that in this case he would definitely die. But while they were trying to tell him what would await him next, a shot rang out in their direction. It was then that one of the partners noticed how the head suddenly fell. But before I could understand what it was, a second shot rang out. Ted understood that if it weren't for his mosquito, he would have already died. But when did these people manage to install the sleeping volcano? The main problem, though, wasn't the trap. The main problem was the skill of the Musketeer Moon Priest hybrid class, and the enemy's level was no less than 500. It was his familiar from the city limits with whom they had a nice conversation, and he suspected that in front of him was a strong musketeer. Ted was also happy to fight with a player equal to him, and it was a good opportunity to finally learn about the character's current abilities. Moon Eye tried to watch every movement in the forest. Ted was waiting for his perfect moment to attack. The Moon Musketeer did not understand why they sent him such food that made no sense. But not only did they not provide anything useful, they also managed to get noticed right away. Although at that moment he was more bothered by the fact that after making 2 shots, he still did not know the location of the target. The whole point was that he managed to hide the glare of the sight and deliver shots to vital organs, from which one can assume that the enemy's level is higher than 500. But why is a ranker of this level in the beginner zone? The guy didn't know what to think about his opponent, but he had already accepted the task to complete. Although the confidence in the enemy's head was very great, since the knight was the best outcome for the Moon Priest. For this reason, he was happy to arrange a duel between 2 musketeers, so he immediately launched an attack with Tornado Whirlwind. This wind spread throughout the forest and looked for its target. Ted didn't understand why the enemy revealed his location and started the battle with such powerful shots. He knew that it was a weapon of mass destruction, but such attacks consume a large amount of mana. But why did he become so desperate and decide to shoot indiscriminately? Although the next moment Ted noticed something strange, and I immediately used the skill 1000 Steps to successfully dodge. He knew that this attack was also not directed specifically at him, but was aimed at destroying the forest so that there would be no places to hide. The Moon Priest sat and waited for the location to be revealed for the next attack. Ted understood that they wanted to destroy him before the mana ran out. That's why he decided to strike back at the enemy. It was a blow of enormous power, and the musketeer did not expect such a blow. Ted knew that he wouldn't be able to kill such a high-level opponent with one blow, but he dealt impressive damage. The Moon Priest was surprised that only one precise shot would be enough to destroy the protective artifact. This fact destroyed all confidence in this battle, and fear began to appear. Now he began to think that this was not the 500th level at all, and did not understand how the guys from Special Paw had brought such a monster upon themselves. At that moment, he realized that he needed to be more focused on the battle. That is why he resumed observation from the moon, expecting a quick calculation. And all because he understood that he had destroyed many shelters and there would be nowhere to hide. The only surviving position was a lone tree among smaller bushy plants. He took out another artifact that he took on such a mission, namely, a thing called the Outcast's Magic Book. It worked in a very unusual way, immersing the entire area under a blue dome. As soon as all this dissipated, something unusual began to happen in the area. During all this, the musket was not put away but remained in sight the entire time. It was only expected that information would arrive, and suspicions would arise that he knew this person for sure. The information was being processed, and then information about the enemy appeared, which stated that he was only level 150. It was incomprehensible to the Moon Priest how such damage could be done at such a low rank. The first guess was cheating, but then he saw that the guy's name was Ted, and he became a little more tense. Although he knew one guy with the same name, he didn't even want to think about it. And all because he considered such damage impossible, and thought that he was dealing with a cheater, and one with the nickname of a person who was great to him. The moon's eye began to disappear at that moment, but for what reason was this? Something like an aura began to appear around the lunar musketeer. It was a special skill called accumulation that allowed one to accumulate excess mana, which could be used if it suddenly ran out. But such determination was not only because of the mission, but also because for him personally, the name of his idol was being tarnished. Ted watched the whole time and did not understand what his opponent was doing, seeing that the musketeer was deliberately reducing the distance between them. But why did he do it? It was then that he put forward the hypothesis of a special skill that could restore mana. It was at this moment that he realized that this could become a problem, and assumed that it was because he had been hiding for so long. After such thoughts, rapid attacks began, and Ted began to understand that he definitely needed to keep his distance. However, after seeing what was happening, I completely stopped understanding the situation. Now it was becoming more and more interesting because he knew for sure that he had been discovered. The anger grew, and the Moon Priest was already shouting his indignation across the entire field. The attacks were so fast that they ran into trees and everything left after clearing. At some point, Ted decided that this was a great opportunity to attack from behind. Using his next skill, namely Field of Vision, he was about to deliver his blow. The shot immediately hit the enemy's back with great speed, and he didn't even have time to understand what had happened. But wasn't this done in order to find the locations? He was about to launch his attack with a quick turn towards Ted. Because of the surprise, fear appeared on the guy's face, but will he be able to dodge? The attack was moving so fast that it was already near the head. Ted managed to dodge and began to understand that this guy most likely just copied the fighting style from watching his own broadcasts. In fact, the anger continued to grow due to the use of the idol's name. He had already begun to tear his clothes, saying that such a person was a disgrace to the class of musketeers. And all because this guy was the leader of the fan club and could not tolerate such shame for himself. Ted knew that this guy was starting to load the moonlight bullet, and if it was used, the entire forest would blow up. The moon began to shine more and more. The guy understood that it wouldn't be long before he died this way, but he could also activate unwaveringness, but she might not have been able to help at all from such a powerful attack. Now he had no other choice and he would have to use one of the tricks. The Moon Musketeer noticed that the guy tried to run away and said that this would not help to hide from such a bullet plan. Anger of such enormous proportions overtook him that he simply waited for the death of his opponent. After the loud phrase, he immediately released a powerful attack. Musketeers were one of the least popular classes, as they required accuracy and a lot of gold was spent on ammunition. There was no auto-guidance whatsoever, so everyone had to learn to shoot straight at the target. But learning was not that easy either, so again, extra expenses were required. And it was also the weakest class in terms of health, and one close blow could instantly send you to the grave. The Moon Priest understood that he could not change what was happening. Even the hybrid connection of classes did not allow to save the situation. Both classes had low survivability and did not complement each other, and the ridicule of other players outweighed the love for his own avatar. For this reason, he himself hated the character he had been pumping for 5 years and wanted to give up by deleting him. But at some point, everything changed. For him, it was just a miracle. He met an idol he wanted to follow who, despite being of the same level, had polished shooting and precise movements. For many musketeers, he became a legend who gave everyone hope. It was the Moon Priest who was one of those who praised that very streamer. It was during the broadcast that he felt needed, because they were completely filled with the charge for the success of each of those present. Many supportive phrases allowed one to feel not humiliation, but pure love for this class. The Moon Priest roared. But he knew for sure that this man had saved him. After the shot from his musket, smoke came out, and there was only one thing left. All that was left was to wait for the flames and smoke to die down. The Moon Priest still thought that he should not have dishonored the name of the great musketeer, but his eyes immediately acquired a look of surprise and lack of understanding of what was happening. He discovered that the shot had not hit the person he was aiming at, but rather the body of a small goblin appeared in front of his face. But where did the creature appear on these planes, and I began to understand that it was the enemy who summoned it. But where did such a useless skill come from? Then quick movements were heard somewhere in the area of the back. And then there was a shot that broke the protective shell that was there. But the Moon Priest thought that it was a skill he had specially learned to lure him. So despite his low level, he had a sharp mind. Ted appeared opposite the moon. Or maybe it was his next shadow. The guy watched his opponent's further actions. Watching the guy, he realized that this man had spent a lot of time training and pumping up, and he had copied the style exactly from the previous Ted. Immediately, a bullet flew into his head, which was aimed at killing with one blow. But this only broke the defense and did not disturb the guy much. The only thing is, increased anger and aggression on Ted's part. The battle was beginning to take on a different outcome, and how would it end? The Moon Priest didn't understand how a level 150 player could have such a rare skill. Unwavering. Ted was preparing for a counterattack from his side, which could decide the outcome of the battle at any moment. The musketeer began to think that he had finally understood something. He remembered that he had seen something similar a lot of times, but where? The aura, the sight, and even the position of the hands, as well as the pose, indicated only one thing, namely, that this is either a complete carbon copy of his idol. So he could say with confidence that this guy was Ted himself. Having realized this, he did not even feel sorry to die at the hands of his idol. Ted also realized that this guy was his fan, and that was the reason he figured him out. The only thing that concerned him was the worry about his anonymity. Although sitting by the tree from fatigue, he began to think about the fact that in this way he received 2 levels and decided to ignore the rest. The only thing Ted didn't expect was that he would have to use that summoning sphere. Although this gift from the Baron was not in vain saved and helped to win today's battle. Now he wanted to continue the quest and decided to rest a little and level up tomorrow. At the same time, the headquarters of Special Paw was discussing everything that was happening. The Guildmaster didn't understand how his man could lose this battle. The Moon Priest explained that the guy definitely didn't care about the county, The only thing was that he could be hired, which was also most likely impossible. The man didn't understand how a ranker of that level could lose, but he knew that while he was dead, there was no chance of a rematch. The master also said that assistance during the siege in the future would help compensate for the money that was invested in this battle. It is for this reason that the lunar priest said that he would help immediately after rebirth. Now the guy could rest, which is what he decided to do. He decided to return, which he immediately reported. But in response, he heard something that was not quite what he wanted. At first, his friends reproached him for being late, and then they started asking about his attitude and whether everything had gone well on his part. But at that very second, he announced his loss, which certainly shocked the girls. They immediately started shaking him for this, especially because he reported on the work that was offered to him, namely, participation in the siege. The girls didn't understand how he could lose to a newbie and disgrace the name of Ted, who had disappeared for them, and the association of musketeers in which he was the most talented. But the guy just smiled happily at such words from his partners, and then he began to tell that he had acquired a new trick, stating that everyone would need a goblin summoning sphere, to which he heard even more aggression. The second girl started a discussion with their four-time partner, who definitely did not want to change the leader. The girl still didn't understand why their leader was so happy if he lost, but he waved his hands and decided to tell his team about witnessing a real revival of a legend and about a miracle that is happening. At the same time, the guy had already returned to the game, but Ted was angry at his fan for destroying the entire forest, as this was the reason why the monsters stopped appearing again. Although the guy knew that he had more or less managed to raise his level and he could already advance to the 4th zone, Ted decided to continue his journey, and the first thing he did was opened the status window to activate the vision skill, which allowed increasing the accuracy of perception of objects. The system immediately began to explore the area, which was not quickly feasible. Ted considered this to be a very useful thing, and all in order to determine the hidden motives of such activity. After some period of time, the exploration of the area is 100% complete. The system also reported completion and immediately began to show everything. The guy reacted with surprise to what he saw, and all because traces of the Lord of Decay were noticed in these places. It was at this point that things began to take a turn for the worse, namely that Special Paw wanted not only to take over the county, but also to summon a boss to this place. It was then that he remembered the words that this would not be just a siege. They wanted to conquer this county with the help of the boss, and that's for sure. They wanted to destroy everything if there was disobedience. Now that Ted had finally completed his task, he realized that he needed to get away from here as soon as possible and not climb into hell. The guy suspected that there might be more than just Special Paw behind it all. The story could be more complicated, and he needed to become stronger and stronger. He continued his journey and went to the next location, namely, in the Spirit Temple, where the recommendation level was no less than 180th. This place was filled with beauty and cute creatures that lived in these places. But this didn't bother Ted much, since he certainly wasn't going to spare such creatures. He was pleased that he had finally found a flock of fire dragonflies. There was just a wonderful atmosphere and nature around, as well as the weather that day. He decided to begin carrying out his planned actions and took up his musket. At least the first thing he decided to do was to summon his goblins. The goblins were waiting for their first orders and were ready to listen attentively. And Ted did it only because it was his only new skill, and he needed to figure out how to use such creatures in the future. He actually wanted to buy another skill sphere, but there were none on the marketplace. And all because he was going to go to the medieval location. He had been sitting without sleep for several days now, and thought that he was unlucky even in such small things. The sadness was simply unbearable. He knew that if there was a more useful sphere, his strength would be much higher. The goblin approached his master, feeling great sadness, and tried to comfort him. Ted tried to calm himself down and decided to enjoy even the little things, and try to teach the little creatures. Remembering the last battle, he realized that they didn't even reach level 30, as well as combat power, and decided to at least upgrade their speed. It was then that he began to speak, and the first thing he did was to attract the attention of each of the goblins. The guy tried to explain that he needed to attract the attention of the fire dragonfly and start running away from it while he was shooting. But the goblins, hearing this, began to tremble out of fear. They immediately began to beg for mercy and a less dangerous task from the owner. Ted, realizing that the goblins were scared, asked them not to cry and to assure him that he would take out such a creature with one shot, and realizing that this was not working, told them to put on something, namely chainmail, and also take up shields for your own protection. But they didn't stop shaking, and the guy started to get angry, raising his voice. Despite their own fear and tears, they still went into battle. Ted didn't know for sure whether the goblins understood this order and decided to trust, if he still wanted to find a use. Then he noticed that the goblins were simply running forward without attracting the attention of the dragonflies. The guy started screaming across the field, thinking that the goblins were running away from him. But raising his head higher, he noticed that the whole flock was approaching straight towards him. After which the unimaginable happened because a pillar of fire rose into the sky. The goblins were already standing and trembling from the anger that could fall upon them, bowing their heads before their master. After the command to stand at attention, they raised their heads and waited for the further outcome. Ted sat covered in ashes and said that he had clearly stated his request before, and the goblins only shook in fear and shame. They carried out a completely different command, even though the guy didn't ask for it, and said that they were just laughing at him. Here he wanted to give up, since they did not listen to the commands and were also incapable of coming up with a strategy. But then Ted noticed something, and it really caught his attention. It was a dragonfly that definitely didn't seem normal, and that's because it had a purple glow and was larger. It was a level 190th astral dragonfly. The goblins, seeing such a creature, became frightened and began to run away. But the guy was preparing to attack and already had a musket in his hands. But the next second, the creatures stopped, seeing that one shot was enough to kill this dragonfly. Ted didn't understand such fear on the part of the goblins. Did they really think so badly of him? The level was raised to 155, and the skill sphere also received an increase due to the fact that the summoning reached 100%. Immediately after such a message, the system displayed a notification about evolution to rank C. Ted thought that he hadn't really done anything like that, but then he remembered that goblins level up while hunting monsters, and now he was wondering what they would turn into. There were suggestions that the orcs and ogres would be the best outcome, although he also believed that goblin magicians would be better than the current version. Expectations were high, so he was really looking forward to it. At some point, the goblins started to change their shoes and there was not much time left until completion. But as soon as it was all over, the summoned creatures only changed their color scheme. Here, the system reported that Ted can now summon silver goblins with a special skill to increase their price. The guy didn't understand why they all changed their color, and the monsters looked at each other from every possible angle. It was starting to seem like it was all just a waste of time, but here he noticed a wonderful thing that could truly make him happy. Namely, a more detailed analysis of the skill that allowed them to synchronize their consciousness and learn everything that their master knew. The system also reported that synchronization would increase by 2% for each level, as well as the level of mastery. This really made Ted very happy, and he called the goblins to come closer to give him something. They went to the next place where there might be monsters, and it really was so. Someone attacked right between the two guards, and they immediately turned around to see who was so impudent. Although immediately after this, there followed another attack that swept through. Ted wondered if they liked doing over 1,000 damage with one shot. The guy told the goblins that now they would kill every monster on their own and was happy. This turn of events more than suited Ted, as well as his entire current team. He only gave orders to open fire on targets, which also endeared him to every goblin. Then the guy came up to them from behind and ordered them to stand at attention, which the kids immediately did, having begun to understand their owner's speech. He asked them not to shoot without his command and clarified whether everything was clear. The goblins realized their mistake and immediately responded with shame that they would follow the commands. Ted understood that it would take a huge amount of time to learn, but for now it was more or less normal. The guy watched as the goblins hacked down a level 200 boss without much effort. The system reported that the level was increased to 200 and also an achievement was received due to Ted never dying during all levels. Due to the achievement, health increased by 5% and a new passive ability appeared that allowed health to be restored by consuming plants. The guy understood that due to the synchronization of 16%, the damage of the goblins became higher even than that of level 350 players. But he also gained a passive skill called empathy, which allowed him to share and feel the emotions of summoned monsters. Now Ted can consider himself to have a personal army, as they have become capable of teamwork due to skill. Afterwards, the guy said that they could take a free position, and now they would all go together to the next point. But where was the third goblin? Ted couldn't see him and kept turning his head in search. Then the guy started receiving notifications, and the first one was that number 3 was very scared. Immediately after, a message came about how the same monster was attacked. Ted immediately began asking the remaining 2 where their friend had gone, and they pointed out the direction. The guy was so scared by the goblin's condition that he was already thinking about calling them back next time right away, and also urgently tried to find him. The monster hasn't died yet, but if it does, it will take an entire hour to resurrect. Ted was really worried and ran along the entire forest. and the guy was able to find it, after which he could immediately calm down. But when he saw the goblin, he was shocked by his condition because he was lying all in blood. And also in this place there were attackers, and some did not even know what kind of creature was in front of them. The man explained to his team that this was the lowest mob possible. Ted began to get angry, and his aggression increased from the insults directed at him. The guy asked to take his feet away from the goblin, because everyone knows perfectly well that such creatures do not live in these places. His health was still there, which meant that he could be cured. But would they leave him alone? It was at this time that someone began activating the fireball. The man intentionally killed the goblin in front of his team and brothers. Ted thought that these people were deaf, because he warned that this was his creature. The man who was apparently in charge began to talk about what he had not heard, and said that if these were his goblins, he should take up their education. It was then that the guy began to get more and more angry. The goblins tried to call back and calm their master. But it wasn't that simple. The system reported higher synchronization due to the wrath experienced by the monster's relatives. The bonus was 10%, and everyone was already very aggressive towards the crowd. Ted was very surprised by such a serious attitude on the part of the goblins, and all because not long ago they were afraid even of a dragonfly. For men, it was unclear why such creatures did not know their place, and why people continued to grin at them. The guy laughed and said that these monsters were very obedient, so he would definitely reward them a little later. The leader of the group who killed their friend did not understand what the reward would be for, believing that they definitely did not listen to them. Ted didn't deny that the goblins still had a lot to learn, but today was definitely not the day for learning. It was then that the crowd stopped understanding what was happening and why the monsters had guns in their hands. A command was heard to open fire, and immediately a shot was fired at the leader. The only thing left from such quick actions is an evaporating corpse. And then more shots started to ring out, causing the remaining people to simply start screaming. One of the guys activated the shield, and they started to think that there was a cheater in front of them. The shots almost immediately penetrated this defense. Ted just watched the situation and how quickly his crime index grew. It was already evening outside, and the weather at this time was just as excellent. But the goblins continued to shoot at the ground even after the battle, as they were still angry. Ted, after some time, tried to distract the goblins by putting his hand on their shoulder, and all because an hour had already passed, which meant that their brother had already been revived and returned. Now the family was reunited, and they happily hugged each other, comforting each other. Ted's only regret was that his crime rate had risen again, but he simply couldn't do otherwise. The guy remembered that he wanted to praise his mobs, and also decided to finally give them names. He decided to name the red-haired goblin Odingi. He called the one who was dark-haired Dwagi, and he called the blue-haired monster who had recently returned Triggy. Each of the goblins and the boy felt pleasant emotions from receiving names. At the same time, someone was very angry about what was happening and the failures. It was the master of the guild, Special Paw, who had already destroyed half of his own headquarters, wondering why this guy appeared and what his goal was. His suspicions about the level were starting to cross the line, since Lone had failed to win the fight. The level could be higher than 650. And all because the man sold all his property for the sake of the success of this plan. Then he received a call that was very unexpected to receive. They checked on the phone whether they were currently talking with the leader of Special Paw, and received an affirmative answer. After this, it was reported that they knew about the difficulties that had arisen with the implementation of the plan. Before the leader could react strongly, he was offered help in execution. The county of Sauron, which was in the kingdom of Karen at that time, it was guarded very seriously, and the guards took turns. Ted watched and realized that he couldn't get into this place. The index was above 6,000, and the guy understood that he had gone too far with killing players. 100 crime points equaled 1 day in jail, which meant the guy would have to spend 61 days there, which was definitely not the time to waste in a place like that. At that moment, someone appeared behind him and he had to turn around. It was a homing pigeon that was apparently delivering goods. Ted was annoyed by the fact that the delivery from the outlet was so loud. The guy picked up his order, and at that very moment the bird attacked him. He didn't understand why he had to attack right away since he was going to pay for the delivery. Having handed over the coins for delivery to the pigeon's wing, the bird immediately gave away the delivered parcel. Ted thought that everyone around him was just a bunch of scum, but he decided to try the product out as soon as possible. He immediately decided to head for the county gates, but one of the guards was confused by such a man. The knight pointed his spear at him and asked what was wrong with such a man. The second guard was tense and did not understand what his partner was talking about. Ted was called a cold-blooded killer, but he pretended not to understand what they were talking about. The knight was interested in how the earth could support such a monster and was already starting to scream loudly. Here the guy did something, but it was only visible in the reflection. He was sweating profusely and asking if he could still get into the county. He was allowed to enter the state without any problems. They talked as Ted moved further and further, and the guard who had suspected him in the past said that he had simply made a mistake. Ted was pleased that he had not wasted a huge amount of money on the scroll of concealing identity, which allowed him to hide personal information for 24 hours. Although he knew that such a scroll might not work on game characters and was happy that luck was on his side this time, now he could calmly go to the place and hand in his assignment. Ted went to the School of Musketeers, which asked him to do something. As soon as he arrived, the master was amazed because not much time had passed, and the guy had already explored all 4 zones. But our hero only laughed at this outcome of events and did not know what to answer. Here, something really began that Ted certainly didn't expect. They began to praise him and say that from a person like the master's favorite student, one shouldn't expect anything less. They asked him to come in rather than stand outside, but apparently they showed him a lot of love, which was painful. They decided to sit down in the master's office and discuss everything. Ted told everything he saw and could find, and then they realized what that dark cloud was. It was impossible to ignore this, but the appearance of the boss in the newcomer's location no longer affected him. The system reported the completion of the task, and a reward in the form of a recommendation to the Thieves Guild will also be received. Raiden immediately handed the letter to the guy. But where should he go with it now? The master asked if Ted knew anything about thieves. The guy said that he knows and knows that their fate is also unenviable. Such people usually lived in slums and attacked everyone who showed their eyes. Someone was hiding in the sewers from the law enforcement officers for their antics. Raiden agreed with everything, but did not understand why such a talented musketeer needed a criminal class. Ted only replied that he really needed it, even though he would be labeled a criminal. Such criminal individuals lost a huge amount of experience due to death. They also had a high probability of dropping equipment items, as the faces of such people very often lit up the notice board. For these reasons, players could come for any such person. But there were also advantages that allowed you to hide the crime index, and you could also gain experience for crimes. Ted knew that this was the best subclass possible because he would have the ability to pick locks, set traps, and be maneuverable. Although the class was not very popular, in his situation it was the best choice. For these reasons, the guy asked where he should go. They told him that he would need to go towards the Panpon wine shop. Namely, go into the alley behind it, and there would be an underground passage. Ted didn't think that this place was so close and decided to initially ask for the second level of the Musketeer class. Raiden was amazed that he was already level 200 and asked if he was tired from the journey. For now, he only asked to be told about the conditions for the transition to the second stage. They told him the conditions of the event, after which they prepared the venue. Ted knew that in order to receive it, he had to live on the academy grounds and train for 12 hours a day, 30 days in a row. These days and trainings lasted very long for many. Raiden suspected that such a talent already knew all this. Ted also gained access to new skills, namely Critical Shot, which was passive and increased critical damage by 2% based on the percentage of mastery, and also Double Jump, which was active and allowed to make a second jump in the air and increased by 0.2 of a meter with each percent of skill. They decided to proceed with the first day of testing. The first thing was to hit the target from a distance of 50 meters, but Raiden didn't even have time to finish. After all, Ted had already hit his target, which was expected. Raiden asked to at least listen to the end for the sake of decency, and the guy said that the test was passed, and if that was all, he wanted to go to the city. He was released, but told not to leave the county under any circumstances. And all because if he leaves this area, he will have to go through testing from the very beginning. The guy understood this and knew it, so he just decided to go to the city. Ted decided to go out just to go shopping, and that's all he reported. His destination was the shopping district. But to be more precise, he was looking for a specific place and thought that such a location was unlikely to change. Then the guy noticed the plant he needed and began to head towards it. He looked around to make sure there was no one extra. Afterwards, I started to tug at this plant, not to mention pull it out. Ted made his way into the dungeon, and the system reported the start of a sudden event as he made his way into the underground shopping district. There were 2 types of trading platforms in Chronicles of Fate. The first was the main platform. These were deals between players and game characters, where there were restrictions on the sale of junk and hazardous substances, but these were just details. And the second case was the black market where Ted headed. Everything could be sold there, and there were no restrictions on sales. But in that case, people's crime rate began to rise, and you could be arrested even on your way out. More often than not, the risk paid off, as there were a lot of cool things to be found in such a place. The system reported that Ted was entering a dangerous zone, and if security detected him, the crime index would increase. The guy waved it off, knowing all the risks and the cellar he was going to was somewhere nearby. Ted looked around and realized that in some places nothing had changed at all. He went into his inventory and started looking for something he could sell, namely the carcasses of angler birds. The guy started loading all these creatures somewhere and knew that he could get quite a bit of money for that. Although such birds were notorious throughout the game, sometimes such birds would fly into the county and the guards couldn't kill them, so a reward was put on the bodies of such monsters. The reward was Sauron's coins, which could be exchanged at both trading points. There was a reward of 1 coin for each carcass, and in Ted's case, that came to 11 coins. As soon as he loaded all the birds, the coins received as a reward fell out of another window. Ted, having taken everything, was happy to see such a considerable reward. Now all he had to do was find a suitable skill area, although any of them could become useful with the help of the 6-pointed star. The guy began to think what would happen if there was a sphere stronger than the goblin summoning. He could only laugh at how bad things would be for his opponents in the future. Now the boy could go to his original destination, namely to the underground shopping district. To be more precise, to the black market, and was already eager to start shopping. He started walking around and looking at all the available goods. His eyes fell on a copy scroll that could create any manuscript except spell scrolls, also incendiary cartridges that allowed for double damage. There were also inventory expansion necklaces, and the guy thought that this could also be useful in the future. But after that, Ted realized that he should stop staring at everything in a row, since he came to this place for one thing. Namely, to search for the sphere of skill, even despite the fact that he could be arrested. The guy was very serious about getting something worthwhile. He began to ask the merchants if they had spheres, but they told him that a couple of days ago travelers had appeared and bought everything. Many tried to stop them, but they killed everyone who resisted, and the man forgot the exact name. But Ted immediately realized that it was the Special Paw who continued to weaken the county in this way. In this case, they were left without additional skills, and the guild became very strong. But the merchant said that they still had 1 skill sphere left. Ted, seeing this, was amazed that such a thing could even remain. After all, it was Lightning Charge, which was an active skill and gave the ability to shoot charged lightning. Namely, such a sphere inflicted an attack on an area, and with the help of 1 bullet, it was possible to destroy a crowd of enemies. The guy was going to get this sphere at any cost and was interested in how much it cost. The seller said that there was a price tag in front of it that could be read. But as soon as Ted saw that the price was 40 coins, he was shocked, and his eyes almost jumped out of their sockets. The seller only said that complaints could be made to the owner of the store, but the guy continued to swear at him for such a ripoff. Another trader reported that this sphere was not bought only because of the price. Ted just thought that luck might smile on him this time, but it didn't happen. But then he heard that someone approached this merchant asking about the progress of trade. He immediately began to justify himself by saying that there was interest in the goods, but the price was too high to buy them out. Ted watched this and realized that it was the owner of the shop, and he was yelling, saying that he had to sell such a ball. At that very moment, the shop manager turned to him and asked what the man wanted to buy, and the guy answered, "A lightning bolt." They also asked him for 40 coins for such a product, saying that he really did have a diamond eye. In his head, he simply flew into space from what he heard. Ted tried to explain that such a price was too high and he could buy several spheres for the same money. The shop owner began to act aggressively, saying that this shop was not for the poor and that it would be better for him to just leave. The guy was shocked by this attitude and simply fell silent. He was surprised that the sphere had such an inadequate owner. If he knew that there would be no spheres in this place, he would not even have gone to such a place. Ted thought about it and decided to wait for more people to arrive, thinking that it was still too early and that new goods might appear with the people. Although he understood that a skill like Lightning Charge would be very useful, he also understood that he would most likely not be able to get a discount. While he was thinking about this, some notification arrived. Namely, a notification that the Special Paw Guild is preparing for a siege on the county in 30 days. The time was also indicated, namely May 16th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they asked to leave the location before the events began. Ted was surprised by this event and didn't even know what to think. They began intensive preparations for a siege to gain control of the county. But players who do not manage to leave the area during this time will also be forced to participate in all subsequent events and battles. Discussion of such madness immediately began, although everyone in this market knew the guild's bad intentions. Ted realized that he needed exactly 30 days to get the second stage, and that was exactly the time the siege would begin. Now this guy was forced to participate in the siege against his will. And that also means that his entire plan for pumping up has cracked. But that wasn't the worst thing. Such an event will be covered by all channels and media. The problem was that he was not allowed to appear in any news. His character should have been removed a long time ago, and if he is noticed somewhere in the media reports, the anger of that magician will fall upon Ted again and he will have to suffer again. So now he needed to somehow hide and complete the pumping. At that very second, he rushed past all the people, not paying attention to everything around him. Ted was angry in his head and wondered why everything would start in exactly 30 days. What was the guild's reasoning behind this? If you accidentally end up in the city, you won't be able to get out until all the events are over. It could take up to 6 months. Now he thought it would be better to give up the second stage than to waste a huge amount of time on something like this. But then he realized that the siege would begin in 30 days, which meant that he would have a whole day to leave the county. He ran to the school, but a whirlwind of dust formed before his eyes. Ted was wondering what had happened, and then he heard a conversation. He noticed that they were yelling at the gunsmith and saying that they had promised to give all the funds back last week. When asked to give him a little more time, the unknown person responded aggressively and hit the man, saying that the debt was constantly growing. They were told to pay or leave the place without being given a choice. Aggression was also shown towards Ted, who was simply standing in the hole through which the gentleman was leaving. The guy immediately asked why Ronaro was beaten, and he only said that he was at the wrong time again. He said that he was leaving, and said that details could be found out from the master. Ted immediately started calling Raiden and was about to go to him. The guy was interested in what was going on in this place and who this person who came was. Raiden said that this man's name was God, and he is the owner of the Shibboleth Academy. Ted was amazed that this man was the owner, but he was told that he had been buying up real estate throughout the county for a long time. He was also not just a rude person, but also a person who overcharged rent and fined for everything possible. Raiden really tried to save the academy for a long time in every possible way, but everything was unsuccessful. This man also took the academy's treasure as collateral, and most likely the guy will have to get a second degree at another academy. Ted couldn't transfer to another school because he would have to start all over again. And in that case, he will not finish his training in 30 days, so during the siege he will be locked in the county. He had already begun to think that the level of such a person was most likely low and he could simply be killed. But this option was also not suitable, since the guards would immediately solve the case that would take place on the territory of the city. If he were suddenly arrested, he would participate in the siege anyway because of the mobilization. Ted believed that everything that was happening was deliberately going against him. He didn't know what to do in such a situation, but then he realized something, namely, that he had already seen such a tap on the head, as the man did in relation to Ronaro. Then he remembered that the gentleman who ran the shop on the black market did the same to his salesman. So he realized that it was the same person, so he could influence him. Ted asked for the opportunity to finally solve the problem that had arisen. At the same moment, the system announced the availability of a new task, namely, assistance in resolving the financial difficulties of the academy. And of course, he accepted such a task and went to the Panpon wine shop, all in order to get a new additional class. He went straight as instructed, namely into the alley behind the shop. He also saw a door that could lead to just that, into an underground passage, which is what it turned out to be. Ted immediately realized that this place belonged to the Thieves Guild, as it was damp and gloomy. But as soon as he descended completely, there was no one in this place. Then someone's voice was heard, asking if the atmosphere was too gloomy for the bear cub. The guy managed to react quickly to this and got his musket ready. Despite everything, he was considered insightful, and finally, a silhouette began to appear. Tisai appeared before him and said that it was impolite to break into someone else's house and prepare your weapon for battle. Ted understood that if it weren't for his keen eyesight, he wouldn't have even realized that there was someone else there. This man was at the 3rd level of the class, and his level was even higher than Raiden's. The guy tried to explain that he came with a letter of recommendation from the master of the Shibboleth Academy. They immediately remembered him, saying that they remembered when Ted studied with the Baron himself, so the gentleman was surprised by such a new criminal. Ted realized that the scroll of concealing identity didn't work on him, which means that he also has a subclass and skill of perception. Although criminals were not uncommon among adventurers, this guild did not accept just anyone. It was then that the guy was surprised by the meaning of the word "we" and immediately understood what was going on. He was called clever, and other thieves immediately began to appear from the shadows. They also told Ted that for their profession, brains alone are not enough, and they laughed a little at what the guy did not understand. The next second, the master raised his hand, showing the bottle that had recently been in the guy's hands. He couldn't understand how this happened, and they decided to give him a little advice. and it was that people who hide the crime rate are too easy to fleece blind. They called him strange and said that advice would not help, but they would still take the potion from him as payment. Tisai reported that it would be better for him to leave this place because he definitely would not train such a fool. The whole team decided to drink a potion for the easiest theft in history. But it was actually Ted's plan that was going well so far. As soon as the master drank the potion, a paralysis effect was cast on him. Now all the team's statistics were temporarily reduced and everyone tried to spit out everything they had drunk. Tisai realized that the guy knew that the whole team had stolen the poison from his hands. Ted said that it wasn't worth it to initially act like the rulers of the world just because of the theft of the potion. He summoned his goblins, shocking everyone. Since the team was called, it was possible to begin the attack. After some time, he called off the goblins and decided to listen to the thieves. Tisai couldn't understand how a person without even the second level of his class could be so strong. Ted decided to ask for the class again after everyone realized what he was capable of. The system immediately reported receiving the second class, as well as receiving 3 skills. Theft and stealth were received, which were active. But not the least important was the hack, after which the guy decided to try everything out in practice. And he decided to do this on Tisai, namely, he used theft. But the system reported that it was unsuccessful, and Ted did not understand how this was possible. The mater laughed at him and decided to help him with advice, saying that before that he needed to go into hiding, because without it any fool would notice how he was rummaging through his pockets. She allowed herself to be hidden for a certain amount of time, and in Ted's case, it was 5 minutes. And whether theft would succeed depended on the number of crowns that appeared while using the skill. Failure was shown by 1 crown, and this meant that you were also discovered. 2 crowns also indicated success in theft, but the person would also learn that something had been stolen from him. And 3 were a complete success, and for each such theft you were given double experience. Although this was conditional, since much depended on the level of the target and one's own level, and the skill of the theft also influenced it, as well as the object of theft, stealth skill, psychological state, and the surrounding environment. Ted thought that everyone's head would ring from such a number of subtleties. But after listening to everything, he still decided to try to do as he was advised. The system has put forward everything with a high probability of theft, and he decided to steal what had the highest success rate, namely an unfinished love letter. It was a double crown theft, but it did award experience and a percentage of mastery. Now Ted understood how everything was happening, and his secrecy immediately fell away. He still wanted to read what was written in the letter and began to do it out loud. Tisai became embarrassed and said that no one gave him the right to read such a thing, so this thing needs to be given back. Ted asked in this case to help a student who had only recently embarked on the path of thievery. But he was told that he was too impudent for a man who poisoned and killed half the team, so class would be enough for him. The guy started reading the love letter again, and Tisai, almost crying, asked him to shut up. After the master agreed to help, Ted asked to tell him how he could quickly improve his stealing skills. Now it was possible to set out to complete the mission. The guy watched how that man treated others badly and began to understand what it was like to treat everyone badly. If people did not have the means, he would put everyone out and take the property for himself. And in order to not be touched, he bought all the guards. But Ted noticed something interesting, namely the use of the scroll of concealment of identity. After which I saw him changing into that cheapskate from the black market. Now he understood that he could not sell everything that had been taken to pay off the debt in the shopping district, and he had to open an underground shop. Ted decided to find a hole in this strategy that everyone had. While observing, he noticed something interesting, namely, an accounting book in his name. It became unclear to him how much trust was being lost, even in an ordinary game character that he had hired. Immediately, Ted realized that this could be his chance. Namely, if he manages to get his hands on this book, he will essentially be able to obtain information about every antics of the god. There were 5 days left before the siege, and thanks to Tisai, he was able to achieve what he wanted, namely pumping up theft by 50% skill, increasing theft points to 150. Ted noticed his target behind him and knew it was time. He started to put on a show in front of the seller and tried to persuade him to sell something, but the price was too low. The guy continued to watch, listening that 1 coin per item was too low. For a year, he recorded sales for that day in the accounting book and threatened to fire him. He realized that his chance had come and activated stealth. Although Ted understood that if this was a failure, his index would simply skyrocket. This was where everything was decided. He began to use theft. The percentage was high on a lot of things, which was just great. Because of the identity concealment scroll, the success rate increased tenfold, which was the reason why it was so easy for Taisai last time. But the chance of successfully stealing the ledger was only 10%. Ted knew that it was easiest to steal from inventory. That's where the probability increased. As soon as she was out of sight, the percentage became 100%. The right moment came, and the guy immediately used the steal. She succeeded in getting 3 crowns and also managed to get double experience and skill. The guy was very happy and immediately began to think, if you are so lucky, you can try to make another one right after. Namely, to steal an identity card, the theft of which also cost 3 crowns. Ted thought that he still had the opportunity to steal something for upgrading, and not a waste of stealth. Then something caught his attention, namely, Sauron's coins, 4 in total. The guy was surprised that he could steal something like that. And what if he fleeced everyone who traded here to the last penny? Then he would be able to buy the lightning discharge skill sphere, which definitely attracted Ted. Now, every 10 seconds, he would commit a theft, taking coins from everyone, always worth 3 crowns. Everything was filled with coins, and the level rose to 206th. The guy carried out the theft 40 times, but only managed to take 32. Ted wanted to quickly steal 8 coins and quickly get out of there, since the stealth would soon end too. He used the steal again and saw what his capabilities were. There were gold coins, a ruby medallion, a skill book, and Sauron's coins in the amount of 8 pieces with a probability of 50%. Ted remembered Taisai's words, telling him not to steal things with a luck rating of less than 90%. What should he do in such a situation? The first plan was to steal the ID in the book and then blackmail them. But now he didn't understand whether there would be such an opportunity again. He still decided to try and take a risk, realizing the chance that he could be caught and sent to prison. And if Ted is locked up in prison, then the second degree can definitely be forgotten. At that moment, the guy used the steal skill and waited for the result. He managed to complete it successfully, but only for 2 crowns. The guy didn't immediately understand what went wrong and was happy. But then he noticed it, and it was too late. The man immediately began looking for the thief everywhere and told him to come out immediately. The system reported that the stealth was expiring, and he was about to become visible. The moment he became visible, God immediately understood who the thief was. The man immediately remembered Ted, calling him a barehead, and began to show aggression. He was already beginning to regret that he had been greedy, and was thinking about how he could leave now. The year immediately brought out the chains, which reduced the criminal's indicators by half. The man immediately activated them and began trying to catch Ted. He yelled at him and said that he would show him what it's like to try to steal something. But the guy couldn't even understand what was happening. But Ted managed to activate the passive skill 1,000 steps, due to which he successfully dodged. Now he realized that such a person was also a guardian, which made it clear how he bribed the city guards. But the man also activated the passive skill Power in Power, which increased the characteristics by 40% in the fight against criminals. The guy considered such an opponent to be the worst opponent with very useful abilities. Ted realized that the enemy was too tough for him and used a double jump. But the man continued to scold him and told him to come back. It didn't end there, as they were already in the city. The persecution continued for a long time. Also using the put, Ted managed to dodge every skill activation, but will he have enough stamina in the future? For a year, I didn't understand how a player with the same level remains faster, and he is obliged to punish the pickpocket. Then he noticed a guy running into the courtyards and went after him. The man immediately slipped into the same place and reported that now it would not be possible to escape. They immediately tried to arrest him and activated another skill based on his appearance. But these were still shackles that only took on a different form. Ted had fallen into the trap of a skill that was dangerous for him, but it didn't matter anymore. God called the guy a noob and said that he was disappointed that the guy got caught with regular coins. It wasn't all that simple, and the guy just started to smile a little. The man really did praise himself for having caught a huge number of fools before. But Ted said that in fact he did everything correctly, and it would have been a problem to shoot someone in the middle of the street. He began to laugh, thinking that with such a debuff it was impossible to inflict much damage on him. Although as soon as the shot was heard, he immediately flew back from the overly powerful blow. The man did not understand how such a person managed to destroy almost half of his health with one shot. And immediately after this opportunity, Ted apologized and decided to activate the thief's secrecy, calling a noob for a year already. This man certainly wasn't going to let the criminal go just like that, and God at that very second took out some kind of magic whistle. It was a skill called Detention that could nullify the skills of criminals within a radius of 10 meters. Ted immediately understood this and began to suspect that such a person had a level of no less than 400. Immediately after, God summoned the Iron Guards in huge numbers. The skill consisted of summoning about 12 controlled guards of at least level 300. Ted began to think that it would be easier to kill, but if he did that, the raid would be activated. The skill was that after a murder with the guard class, information about the killer would be sent to the nearest guards, as well as the location. God believed that now he definitely wouldn't be able to escape and ordered the guards to catch the criminal, but also to protect his life. They immediately began to surround Ted, trying to prevent him from escaping. But it wasn't that easy, and the guy fulfilled the call of the Silver Goblins. The rifle battalion was ready to begin the battle. Ted ordered to shoot at the armored dummies but not to touch the man in the mask, after which he immediately gave permission to open fire. The goblins were happy to take part in such a battle once again, and even the guards were amazed at how much aggression there was. After seeing this for a year, he didn't understand how such monsters could cause so much damage, and he understood that if this continued, he would definitely lose. Immediately after that, the order for a general offensive was given. They immediately rushed towards Ted, who was standing peacefully, and the system reported that it was a skill that forced all the dolls to attack. But the man knew that he didn't need to win. He just needed to use evidence collection to get his things back. This skill was used to collect all the stolen items from criminals. All that was required was to get closer. But just being close isn't enough. He needs to touch the person to activate the skill. Ted was not so simple and knew that if they wanted to get close to him, it was only to use the skill Collect Evidence. The guy noticed the man very close and immediately used a double jump. And immediately after 1,000 steps, allowing you to move away even further, or on the contrary, to attack, but understood that it was necessary not to kill. He decided to just try to pierce the leg. He definitely wouldn't die from that. So Ted immediately fired his shot straight at the foot. The year wasn't going to give up so easily as it got closer and closer. The guy was surprised by the fact that the enemy also had steadfastness. It allowed damage to be converted into defense with less than 10% defense. We managed to touch the guy and activate evidence collection before he managed to activate 1,000 steps. The ledger was returned as evidence. He was already starting to rejoice, but then he noticed something unusual. Ted also had a ledger in his hands, but how could this happen? The guy mocked his opponent, saying that everything was really that simple. The man immediately began to check what he had in his hands, not understanding what it all meant. Ted said he wasn't such an idiot, that he wasn't prepared for something like this. God realized that this guy used the copy scroll, which he didn't even try to deny. The guy said that before implementing the plan, he specially bought this scroll just in case. Luck was often not on Ted's side, so he had to be prepared for anything, and as soon as he received the ledger, he copied it. Now the man was cornered, realizing that manuscripts and their copying did not require much time. The guy understood that it would be impossible to remove the copy because it was not stolen, but the business would also be under threat after this. God began to ask if he wanted money and was already screaming in fear. Ted immediately shut up about this attitude towards himself after all the events. He only asked to be more respectful while he was on his knees, and after all this, he decided to state his demands. The man was definitely not in danger of dying, so Ted suggested discussing everything. God said that he would do everything just to keep his affairs from falling into the hands of the guards, and now the guy was starting to like this kind of conversation. The first thing he asked was to lay out everything that was in the inventory. What happened next was clear, so he quickly returned to the academy. Raiden was truly amazed by the fact that Ted had managed to make the man undo so much. The guy said that now they will pay rent without interest and will not claim more than a year. He also said that he managed to get a lightning discharge completely free of charge. The skill sphere allowed for large area damage, and the current damage was 30%. Ted knew that musketeers most often have no skills in the area or they are too weak, and as the owner of the six-pointed star, it is possible for him to turn this into an imbo. Raiden fell to his knees in front of the guy, and all because he helped them not to lose the academy. He also bowed his head and continued to talk about his gratitude, and now he became like a son to him. Ted said that he was a graduate of this place and wanted to protect it, and also thanked for preserving this place for many years. The task was completed, and the reward was an achievement and an increase in trust in the relationship with Raiden. Thief of Boons increased the mastery defect for thief skills by 10%. Ted was amazed at what happened next. This achievement ignored the progress threshold and allowed one to achieve more, as well as obtain additional effects. The guy who didn't do it for the reward was pleasantly surprised by such a bonus. Now he had only 5 days left to sit in the city and finally leave this place. Ted was able to get a new degree and also upgrade his things. This uniform was quite rare and gave plus 25 to general characteristics, as well as 10% to health and mana, but also increased defense by units. The guy understood that such clothing didn't look good with a bear's head. But the main thing now was statistics. Ted knew that with the help of the sphere and things from his hands, monsters would fall in droves. Now he could get even more useful skills and things. His soul felt warmer from this. What could go wrong? But then something truly unexpected happened, namely, the guy began to feel something strange, all because he was lucky only once in this life. Namely, with receiving the 19th enchantment on your musket. Despite the fact that the goblins were experiencing only happiness at that moment, the guy suspected something bad. Notification of change in siege schedule received from Special Paw. Ted realized at that very moment that this was his bad feeling. The siege scheduled for May 16th was postponed to the 10th, and everyone was also asked not to ignore the notice by leaving the area if they did not want to participate in the battles. The guy understood that he would receive the second level only in 3 days, which meant that he would not have time to leave the county. Ted couldn't understand how this was possible because it would start in 2 days. He lay on the ground and was very angry at such changes, as he had tried so hard to fulfill all the plans. At first, the goblins did not understand their master at all, and after that, they definitely didn't give the same reaction as the gentleman. On the contrary, they began to laugh at such changes, and Ted asked them to stop because he was suffering. The guy really had always hoped to leave this place before the siege began, but he was met with failure. Raiden, noticing the suffering, tried to find out what happened. The guildmaster reported to the count about a strange cloud, the nature of which was revealed by Ted personally. Sauron ordered to destroy it and to minimize losses, an elite will be gathered. These people could quickly deal with possible risks, which is why he also suggested that Ted go into battle with them. The guy was not against it, but how should they deal with him getting the second stage, which could cause him to lose his progress? Raiden reassured the guy that he would save his progress if he went with him, and all because he alone was worth 100. The system reported a new task, in which it was necessary to destroy the ominous cloud in the quadruple zone of the plains. The guy, although he didn't really want it, still accepted the task to complete. The system also notified that the task was accepted. Raiden thanked him and informed him that they could move out now since all the things had been collected. The guy didn't want to stay in this city after going so far. Ted decided that as soon as he destroyed this cloud, he would go and destroy the people who had caused all this. And all because they put spokes in his wheels more than once. At the same time, the Moon Priest led his team to the place of the first meeting with Ted. They asked if they had met in the 4th zone and what they would do if he had already left these places. But then they all received some kind of notification, namely, the same notification about the change in the siege schedule from Special Paw. The girl said that they should leave these places, or they would be stuck in these places for a long time. The second girl said that they, on the contrary, would take part in the siege with their master, but for what purpose? The guy from the musketeer team said that if Ted is at odds with the guild, they won't be able to meet. Their goal was only to find the missing master, and it didn't matter which side. And if they joined the enemy, everything would be even easier after they would simply abandon the guild. The only thing that fans really needed was to just see their idol, and for this they would do a lot. Ted was on his way to a mission with Raiden at the time, and was just leaving the county gates. But as soon as he saw everyone who arrived, he immediately realized that the count did not spare any money for such a task. And all because the level of each of the fighters definitely exceeded 500. Many people humiliated the Shibboleth Academy, calling those who came from there suckers. And all because Hecatan, nicknamed the Knight of the Storm, was worried about the appearance of the best student, who personally looked like a cartoon character to him. Ted immediately understood the main reason for this attitude, namely, because these two classes had never gotten along in their lives. Raiden was angry and told him to shut Hecatan's mouth, since this man had done a lot for the entire academy. They continued to ask him why he was offended because, after Shibboleth left, this place would die anyway. But he continued to be angry for such words and said that he would not spare the patron for another similar statement. But Hecatan was not going to give up and said to try to launch his own attack. The man stopped this behavior by calming down by saying that everyone present had gathered in this place to protect the county. It was the head of the Academy of Magicians who said that each of the guys should set an example for the youth coming to receive classes. At that very moment, both began to blame each other and continued to behave like children. Ted, seeing this, began to understand that the similarities between everyone ended at the level they had achieved, and now he was more worried about their success. Raiden apologized to the guy for witnessing this scene, but he told him not to worry because everyone has people they don't even want to see. Ted's main opportunity in this mission was to level up. Soon they arrived in the Valley of Sauron in the 4th zone. There was a discussion about the fact that this cloud was created by Special Paw, and for some it did not foretell trouble. Ted noticed that it seemed closer now than on his last visit. The system reported that the progress of the approach was 85%. And then another message appeared that the Lord of Decay had discovered the team. After this, many of the crew became scared as he began to descend. Having realized that the boss is much smarter than it seems, his attacks need to be repelled. There was a huge explosion, but even such a blow could not affect the cloud, and the knight praised Rinchin. But as soon as he turned around, his eyes changed to shocked, and now he started to stutter. And all because the cloud only began to approach the ground faster. So after a few seconds, it hit the ground. After which, two red dots resembling eyes began to appear from the haze. At such a moment, many began to become increasingly afraid of what was happening. After all, a huge army of the dead began to appear from the haze. There were not only berserker skeletons, but also magical zombies. Ted first activated the mosquito bullet and immediately after, summoned his brave team of silver goblins. He ordered the kids to shoot at the monsters and the mosquito to wait for the command somewhere nearby. Now he also clearly observed his main target. And after the orders were given, Ted began his attack. Many of those who came to the battle understood that in front of him was definitely not a weakling who could handle a musket just as well. The knight was amazed by this, and this means that the rumors about Raiden's so-called son, who was stronger than everyone else, were not unfounded. He could only watch as Ted stacked up the monsters and controlled the goblins with weapons. At this time, the guy's level increased quite a bit, namely by 3, and was already 209th. Despite such easy farming, it was not so easy for the rest of the team to hold their own in battle, and Ted knew that if the boss continued to summon the undead, his mana would quickly run out. Although he also understood that this was all to his advantage because this way he would gain many levels. But the other gentleman didn't like this, and he definitely wanted to deal with this cloud faster. Ted didn't understand what was happening to this man and already wanted to take some measures. Namely, accidentally shoot your knee in order to get higher farm. The warrior, having approached the cloud, used Nine-Headed Dragon's Rock. It was like a little sun on the tip of a sword. As soon as the skill became active, he began to strike the air in huge numbers. But as he continued to run, something strange began to appear behind him. Namely, the hands that began to grab the warrior all over his body. Raiden also realized what was going on and called someone over. Something unexpected happened here, and the guy immediately noticed it. Namely, Ted noticed that someone had just been encased in crystal. And this is Hekatana, and what should we do with it now? After being put into the shackles, he began to transform into a similar monster that was advancing on them. An unknown monster named Archlick Paragon of unknown level. It possessed the body of the Storm Knight for 10 minutes, and the system reported it. Ted had never noticed anything like this before and was surprised. The task has now changed, and even the task rank has become lower. Now the main task was not to kill the entire cloud, and in the destruction of the Archlick Paragon, who took possession of the body. Hekatana, what did the murder mean, and the game character? Ted still didn't understand how it was possible for the boss to possess someone. The guildmasters realized that they would have to destroy their former partner, who had been taken over by the filth. But Raiden took matters into his own hands and ordered that, no matter what it took, Hekatan be killed quickly. At the same moment, various skills flew out, namely Ice Arrow, Piercing Bullet, and Cross Star. But the huge crust looks like a crystal. It even almost cracked from everything that was applied. The Mages Guild was shocked by this outcome and no one understood what to do. It was then that the leader realized that even the elite fighters were unable to do anything destructive. They could all be killed in this place, and a siege would begin very soon. They couldn't waste that much energy on the boss, and the man wanted to give the order to retreat. At that very second, lightning strikes were heard everywhere, and at the very last second, the blow hit the crystal exactly. The system immediately reported the current protection level at 97%. Everyone immediately noticed that the crystal had finally cracked, but who did it? They started looking around and wondering who this guy was. The level was increasing, and this was the main thing for Ted. In the past, he had not made efforts in vain to improve his skills. The lightning charge's mastery level was 70%, and the damage bonus was 65%. Now the order had changed. Namely, it was to protect the musketeer to attack the crystal. Ted was surprised by this outcome. But now he had no choice, since everyone was asking him to quickly free Hekatan. The guy gave the order to the battalion to continue the attack on the undead, and he will be busy crushing the sarcophagus into small pieces. The system reported that the Archlick's crystal was at 91% protection, and as the attacks continued, the level of defense fell faster and faster, and after a few minutes it dropped to 1%. Ted said that if he continued shooting, the body would be damaged, but everyone understood that. Hekaton's body was already infected with filth, so the only thing that was possible was to die as a warrior. The black heart damaged the game character by 30%. He began to talk and said that the body had been rotting for 200 years. The revival of the level 500 Archlick was not completed, and Ted realized that this creature would somehow be reborn. And the boss said that if this doesn't happen yet, he will take everyone with him. After some period of time, the system reported that the monarch of decay had risen. He was angry at the whole world, and all people were destined to rot to the last one. All the warriors who came to this place began to seem more frightened, because the creature grew before our eyes to an unimaginable size. This monster gave the order to kill everyone who was in this place. The knight asked everyone to be careful, because these dead people were different. But speaking about this, he himself did not notice the rapid approach to his own person. He was given a debuff called Corrosion, which reduced his health by 1% every 10 seconds. Poison from the monsters splashed everywhere, and people screamed in pain as each body began to rot. Raiden gave the order to attack their legs so that they would not be able to get closer, and also not to touch their bodies under any circumstances. At that very second, Ted tried to kill the Archlish, but the musket shots did no damage at all, which could only mean one thing. It is precisely about the fact that the core was located somewhere else. It remained to find out where such an important artifact was located. Ted asked the Master of Magic to shoot at the monster to find out where the core was. After the request, he immediately began to cast a high-power spell. Ice spikes began to appear around the monster, which meant it was a spell called Ice Storm, which allowed the release of a huge number of icicles, slowing down enemies. The monster was immediately subjected to rapid attacks of spikes, which continued for a huge amount of time. He didn't expect such an attitude because there were ice cubes sticking out all over his body. But it didn't end there. Ted continued shooting and finally saw the core that took so long, but as soon as it was discovered, the core seemed to evaporate in that same second, which left the guy shocked. Now Ted knew that the core was moving through the body, but how was that possible? While he was distracted, a zombie approached him. Since he didn't have time to dodge it, the corrosion debuff was also applied to it. The guy was really angry about this, namely that even on a regular mission he had no luck. But as Ted continued to dodge, he began to understand that everything was going wrong. He understood that even if the monster didn't take damage, why didn't it even try to dodge? The guy assumed that the monster simply couldn't move. He began to remember everything and decided to do something. Now Ted asked Raiden and the goblins to buy him some time. He activated the thief's stealth and began to push his way closer to the Archlish. The guy remembered the words of the chief thief who said that there are two things, namely those that can be stolen and those that cannot be stolen. Ted jumped around the monster's body between the ice flows that remained in the body. He recalled that he had already stolen personal items, and all that was left was to hope that it would work this time. Black Heart of Paragon, with a 15% success rate. So Ted was really happy with this opportunity, even with a small percentage of success. The guy understood that, given the remaining mana, he would be able to use Steal about 20 more times, after which he immediately used Theft, with the hope. But the first attempt failed, and now he is visible to the monster. Ted knew he could expect something like this. And now, there were about 19 attempts left, so he was definitely not going to leave. The guy angrily returned to the room, his eyes burning with aggression. Even though it all happened in his head, he didn't come to this place just like that. Everything was done to grab Luck by the side. Clover said that he was not to blame for the failures, and all because 18 times the use of Theft was a failure. For these reasons, he beat the escaped Luck hard. And then he grabbed the Clover by the cheek and said that if bad luck befalls him again, the guy was definitely threatening his luck and dragged him along with him. On his last attempt, the guy actually managed to steal 2 crowns, and the body in which this heart was located initially began to evaporate. Everyone except Raiden was amazed by the boy's abilities, and he, in turn, always believed in his son. Ted's level started to rise at that very second, but where is the limit? He rose to 232nd, and his hand finally emerged from the ashes. Due to a level gap of more than 200 points, the achievement Model Hero was obtained, increasing all characteristics by 50 points. The guy was surprised by some other reward besides the levels. Also, by killing the boss by stealing the heart, the achievement Heartbreaker was obtained, which increases the threshold of the thief skill by 30%. The guy was happy because he also got the Black Heart of Paragon, which was the material for creating the Chronicles. It allowed for the creation of unique skill areas that did not exist in the system. Ted wanted to meet Brahman so that he could create the best skill possible. He remembered that the blacksmith had become a god at their last meeting. The guy considered this the best reward he had received in all the time he had spent in the game. Hecaton nevertheless died from his injuries, and his students mourned such a loss. Ted understood that only players could be resurrected, which was considered an aspect of the game's realism. Everyone mourned the head of the Warrior Academy as he left this world forever. After everything was over, they went to file a report, and many were unhappy. Hecaton could not bear everything that happened to him. Count Sauron, reading the report, was amazed that everything was true. But he couldn't believe that the best warriors couldn't kill the monster, and an ordinary traveler managed it alone. The head of the Mages Guild did not dare to lie to his lord, and he offered to hire this guy for the upcoming siege, since with this force they would be able to defend their rights to the lands. The Count understood that they would not dare lie to him, but he did not think that such a decision in such a situation would be reasonable. Richin asked the reason for the refusal, and Sauron asked if they could really trust the traveler. The magician was stunned by this question and did not know what he should answer in such a situation. The only fear was for the lands that wanted to take the county lands into their own hands. Everyone in this world acted only from their own interests, just like Special Pa. But there were also people who would carry out any order only for good pay. The Count asked how much they would spend on such a force of resources, even if they only had one person. Most of the soldiers were ordinary conscripts. However, there were also mercenaries who were paid 2 to 3 times more. But Special Pa had long since begun to worry about the county being in a bad economic situation. And if Ted manages to stop the siege alone, he will have to pay a huge sum for such a feat. Count Sauron was worried that if this really happened, he would definitely have to give up the entire county to pay off. So before hiring a specialist, you need to think twice. Despite the loss of Hecaton, the worst is already behind us. The master of the Academy of Magicians immediately understood everything that was happening and fell silent. At the same time, the sorcerers arrived at the place where the siege was to begin, and everything was already ready. But the guild master was indignant again, and all because the Archlich had already been defeated even before the siege began. He recalled that in the past he had to perform everything for the amusement of the audience, but now he could go back to the very beginning. Even though the Moon Priest brought his friends, they won't be able to pull everything out without extra help. One of the team was above level 370, and the other 3 were above level 500. According to the information, the Archlich was killed by a musketeer. But the guild master clearly remembered that there was no one in the county above level 650 with such a level. He was wondering what had been missed. And at that moment, someone came into his tent and asked why the commander was so tense. The leader said that he was not at all tense because the rankers of the Blue Sky Empire were on his side. This man laughed and said that there really was nothing to worry about. Tanichi was a level 672 battering ram. The priestess next to him asked her partner to be a little more modest, and he said that the girl always likes to push. Ruri was a level 685 parasitism mage. The guild leader immediately realized that he shouldn't worry, since he had the best mage and player on his side. But he will win the siege only if the man who defeated the Archlich does not stand up to defend the county. But as soon as they arrived, he told them that Ruri's creation had recently awakened from sleep. She suffered a defeat, which the girl herself did not expect. Charisse said that he was upset about this, but Ruri laughed and said that everything would definitely be fine. She said that the Archlich was easy to destroy if you distribute your forces correctly, so there wasn't much hope for him. The gentleman tried to explain that such a person could be on the side of the county but did not have time to finish. The girl asked if Charisse knew what the tattoo behind her ear meant. A man with a similar tattoo said that this is the number of territories that they managed to capture. The tattoos were evidence for him, and he began to trust those people more. Tanechi was only glad to have a strong opponent and said that now he knows that he doesn't have to hold back. Ruri asked to be allowed to tell the master the outcome of this battle that will begin tomorrow. She said that in exactly 3 days the county would be in Charisse's possession, and they would drink wine in the mansion. The next day, notification came of the beginning of a siege between Special Pa and Sauron's county. Everyone was ready to start and were watching each other. It seems that the guild side began to form a magic circle. The magician standing nearby did not understand why they were doing this, because there was a barrier on the walls of the county. But in reality, all of these were support spells, namely regeneration, damage increase, and range increase. Everyone who observed this for the first time saw such a huge number of spells. They began to worry about what was happening and then noticed that all the spells are cast on only one fighter, but why waste so much mana on one? But then they noticed how the man began to move forward. Some guy was singing a song, and the only thing they saw was his blue suit. Was it really just one person speaking out against the county? What did the guild plan anyway? But the mages were given the order to put their fire cannons at the ready. A huge number of charges flew at Tanechi, but he did not try to do anything. all because it was enough for him to activate his skill. He decided to take on the blue dragon robe, which immediately began to appear. His armor transformed into a denser one, and a huge sword and helmet appeared. All the fire strikes were in vain, as a blue beam was directed upward. As soon as the haze began to clear, many noticed that there was not a scratch left on the knight. They were too surprised, but they were told to forget about it because the enemy was attacking. Tanechi rushed towards the county with full determination. The order was immediately given to fire freezing shells until it stopped. But the guy was confident and used the blue dragon charge. And all this in order to destroy the county's protective wall with one blow. It only took one high-power blow to destroy the protective shell that prevents any spells from entering the city. Rinchen was amazed, as were the magicians who cast this triple barrier, and that meant that the strength of the gate was becoming lower and lower. He told the mages to continue the attack and use their best spells. Although all attempts, be it fire or ice attacks, were a failure, they did not understand why a person in the enemy, even after everything, remains completely untouched. Rinchen said that he would buy some time, and in the meantime they should report to the Count about what was happening. Tanechi, however, moved closer and closer to the gates with great speed, wondering how long the county's forces would last. Sauron did not understand how, in such a short period of time, the outer gates had suffered so much that they were almost destroyed. They tried to explain to him that not a single spell worked on this man, and all because the enemy had too strong a support mage. They urgently needed to come up with a new strategy that would allow them to retain the county, and the man was asking about shooting at the goal? But there was nothing like that in the report, and was it necessary to clarify such information? The Count recalled that the boy was receiving the second level of the class, and for this very reason, he was unable to leave the county, which meant that he still had not chosen a side. But why did they enter into a battle that was obviously lost? Although no one knew what kind of monster they would encounter. In his head, Sauron was thinking about how to evaluate the situation, because he had not yet taken the enemy's side. He sent word that someone should go to the Shibboleth Musketeer Academy and find an adventurer named Ted. The guy had just woken up and was sitting down to breakfast. But good morning was not that. And all because the news report said that two major guilds had seized the entire kingdom of Tirith for their own pleasure. Ted was very angry. And all because in the past he lost everything and now he has to level up all over again. But then he realized that there was no point in being angry and that everything could play into his hands. Since the main rivals are playing at being conquerors, they will not have time for his affairs. Now, even if he participates in the siege, they won't be up to the news. And even if news appears about his participation, no one will be able to prove that they are dealing with the same player, and not just a person with a similar style. Ted immediately returned to the game, realizing that he needed to end the siege faster, and Raiden was already waiting for him. His studies are finally completed, so he has now received his diploma. Now his class was upgraded to Professional Musketeer, but he was also informed that the Count wanted to see the guy, which surprised him greatly. Raiden decided to tell what actually happened, namely, the worst-case scenario began to happen. The enemy army's hero single-handedly broke through the gates of the outer wall, so the troops won't hold out for long. Ted said that he understood that the enemy is not simple, considering the summoned monster. But Raiden didn't stop there. He said that even experienced soldiers couldn't stand up to one of their heroes. Everything was really bad. But the situation was getting more and more interesting considering the hired rankers from the Special Paw side. Ted was really starting to think that the siege was going to be more interesting than he had originally thought. There was a knock at the Count's door, announcing that they had managed to bring the adventurer he was looking for. The guy showed respect to the Count and also introduced himself by his name and waited for the further situation. He was asked if he knew about the current situation regarding the siege, and as soon as the guy confirmed, he was asked a question about whether Ted will be able to help the county survive the siege as a mercenary, where it was necessary to participate in battles for more than 15 hours, and the contract will end as soon as it ends. It was a good task from all sides in which the guy did not risk anything and could still receive compensation. For this reason, he was ready to accept the task, but he wanted to ask a favor of the Honorable Earl. Ted said he wanted to shoot all the Special Paw representatives on the outer wall, but to fulfill the plan, he needs 100 people, namely 100 wizards under his command, and he will be able to eradicate the problem that the county is facing. His conditions were met, and Ted told the magicians that the plan depended on their help. The guy only asked to pump up his mana and try to do it without interruption, and he would do the rest. Although the wizards were surprised, they agreed to these conditions. Ted looked at the wall, realizing that it had really been battered quite a bit, and all this was done by a man in blue armor. It was also known that Rinchen tried to attack him with A-rank magic, but it did not help, and the only one who fit the description, there was a ranker from the Blue Sky Empire named Tenechi. It was not a small guild, though not a huge one, although there was no time to think. Ted saw this as a great opportunity to test his strength in a battle with a top player. He asked to start putting buffs on him. The magicians immediately agreed and began to open a large number of seals. Magic Flow and Quick Recovery were activated, but he hadn't started yet. He decided to wait a little longer, expecting the mana recovery speed and the reduction of the cooldown to 1 minute of the lightning charge. Now Ted was ready to begin the battle with the Special Paw Guild. At the same second, after receiving all the necessary buffs, he activated the lightning charge skill sphere. Lightning began to strike the military tents, bouncing off each other. The enemy guild soldiers were shocked by the level of attack they witnessed. The leader of Special Paw knew for sure that this was not a game character, since they did not have such ranged combat skills. Ted's level was constantly increasing, as was his skill mastery. The guy also had a huge number of defense points, namely already over 25,000. Now it was clear why he was lucky enough to receive such a weapon. Even when I got a crappy skill sphere with the goblin summoning, I initially thought that I would never use it, but he was also able to defeat the Moon Priest with increased enchantment damage. Despite all the misfortunes that Ted diligently ignored, there was one and the same reason. He diligently accumulated luck all his life for one thing, namely, for the sake of one's own weapon, which became the key to overcoming all failures. But luck told me that having one weapon is not enough. How fate will turn out depends only on actions. Ted thanked Clover for such wonderful advice and said that he would follow it. She only asked him not to strangle her at every little trouble, but the guy couldn't promise that. The head of Special Paw was angry and looked for Ruri and Tenechi in all the tents. He was angry and shouted that 20% of the army had been destroyed in an hour. But the warrior only laughed, saying that the fun had finally begun. They knew that the only similar skill was lightning charge, but to increase the power by that much was simply unrealistic. Charisse called the man a useless mountain of muscle that was only useful in combat. Ruri was also shocked by the outcome of events, but at this rate they would not reach the county walls. She reported that such a powerful opponent was not expected, so it was worth acting immediately. Charisse only hoped that they actually had a plan for this kind of eventuality. They had only one plan, which was to destroy the main gate of the county today and start a large-scale battle tomorrow. But they would have to change the whole plan, even though they didn't know who the player was who had settled on the outer wall. Ruri, however, was confident in her parasite, which she left just in case. The lightning charge skill sphere proficiency level had reached a full 100%, and Ted was in anticipation of seeing the enhancements. The orb's rank was increased to C. It now stunned for 2 seconds and dealt more damage with a 3-second cooldown. Ted was most surprised that this area of the skill would gradually progress. They went sequentially starting from beginner, and from there it wasn't far to rank A. He dreamed of seeing such a growing force in action as soon as possible. Here everyone noticed that an attack from the enemy was being prepared on the county. The guy was too surprised by such a quick attack. They immediately began preparing to contain the Special Paw army. The magician talked to Ted, and they knew that there had to be a reason for such a sudden transition to the offensive, so it was better for him to keep a low profile until the situation was clear. The guy understood that they were right, and since he had no defensive skills for a frontal attack, it was better to lie low. But then one of the soldiers began to shout at the top of his lungs about what he saw, that the monster in blue armor is preparing to attack. But what was the enemy guild really thinking? They could put Tenechi in danger, but it wasn't that simple. The guy in blue armor was definitely in an aggressive mood, saying that they would crush the county in one blow. He immediately activated the Blue Dragon's protective scale. The Ram Man lived up to his nickname, as his armor was enchanted to +7, and also the skill Blue Dragon's protective scale was pumped up to rank A. This skill converted the damage received, in its own way, allowing it to attack with great force. The magician, knowing that this monster didn't care about any skills or attacks, told everyone to go to the inner fortress. He also asked Ted to retreat along with everyone else in order to think over the future strategy. But the guy didn't plan to do this, considering that such an opportunity was not in vain. He remained waiting for the moment when the skill's effect ended to deliver a counterattack. And the most important reason was simply the fact of interest in how many shots can the battering ram take from Ted. Tenechi also wanted to meet with a player from the county side to test their strength. The magician tried to force Ted to retreat so that he would not suffer from the destruction of the gate, but the guy had his own plans, so he was already in the crosshairs for a counterattack. Tenechi did not expect such meanness from his opponent at all, but he didn't understand how this was possible because he was under a defensive skill. Although almost immediately he realized that the man had calculated the timing of the skill and managed to shoot exactly 1 second per second. There was something green glowing on his neck, namely, he started shouting to Ruri that he had finally figured out the enemy's location. It was a communication amulet that helped players communicate over long distances. Tanechi said that he was on the right side of the outer wall, and the girl continued searching. A rift began to appear nearby, which was actually the curse of territory rights that reduced all stats by 20% and resistance by 15. An eye appeared above Ted's head, which definitely scared the guy. Afterwards, attack block was applied, and a mana cloud began to appear. If you fall under its influence, all attacks will be blocked for 10 minutes. It was then that he realized that he had been exposed because of the last shot. But there was nothing else to do, and he had to use 1,000 steps, and immediately after, a double jump. It was unpleasant for Ted to realize, but this time he was forced to retreat. But why did this cloud continue to follow him? He tried to shoot through these two mini clouds, but at that very moment an attack flew at him that dealt almost 50% damage. Now, Ted was given a debuff preventing him from attacking for 10 minutes. It was clear to him that the caster was definitely of a high level and was not an ordinary ranker. The last skill quickly put the guy out of action. He decided to activate the Thief's Stealth and retreat to the Count's army. One of the warriors reported that the outer gates were about to be destroyed. Just a couple of minutes later this happened, and immediately after that, Special Paw began their offensive. Ted needed to farm experience faster for the next battles. He knew that although he couldn't attack himself, he could release goblins and mosquito bullets. At the same time, someone was entering the county territory. These were a team of fans who began to enter deep into the opponent's territories, and someone was very worried about their capture. But if they could meet their idol, they could even accept death. The guy reported that most likely the lightning attack was caused by their beloved Ted. It wasn't a magic-type attack, but at the same time, the radius and damage were colossal, so the only thing that came to mind was the lightning charge skill sphere. The partner was interested in how this was possible since the sphere was of low rank. Even though it sounded like nonsense, Ted defeated their leader at level 150. So there really is an ace up his sleeve. The Moon Priest was trying to find something in the middle of the forest. But then he noticed something a little different from what he was initially looking for. Namely, their team discovered a corpse on which something similar to the vampirism skill was used. The guy, having looked at the body more closely, said that this is how it was, taking into account the injuries inflicted. The girl was surprised that there was a skill of this kind that could kill. Although this was indeed possible, it was only at high ranks, and there would be no such people in the beginner's location. And at that moment, the body said, "Go, goblins." But goblins couldn't appear in this location, only orcs could appear here. At that very moment, he remembered the battle with Ted, in which the goblin summoning sphere took part. And at that very second, one of them was attacked. They attacked the team leader and everyone asked the girl to help quickly, namely, to use the skill Star Step. This ability allowed teleportation over long distances and had a mass effect. They immediately went to the other side of the forest. Since the damage was simply enormous, they began to suspect that the attack was carried out by Ted himself. Or maybe they just thought so, but the girl said that she envied her master. But they flew to the enemy's side, namely to the county army. Raiden immediately told them to stop or they would be attacked. At that moment, the girl did something that no warrior expected. She tore off her opponent's overlay, which amazed everyone. Afterwards, it was reported that everyone came in peace and wanted to help with surviving the siege. They understood that they would be fined for such actions, but seeing their idol was much more important to them. The girl said not to rejoice too early because he still needs to be found. But she also expected this and believed in their success. At the same time, the leader of Special Paw received notifications that 3 players had left the faction. He did not understand why this happened and began to get very angry. And most importantly, they did this even knowing the size of the fines for changing factions at such an important moment. The man did not understand what these people were doing and decided that their leader should deal with them. But as soon as he started searching for information about the Moon Priest, the system reported the status of the dead man. But how did this guy manage to die again at such an important moment? Ruri continued to search for their main enemy, calling him a monster to no avail. She was amazed by the fact that this guy's level was lower than their own, but his damage was higher than the mage and Tanichi. Ruri asked her partner not to get into trouble, but he found such words funny. He didn't understand why they were so worried about him, because even if the opponent was strong, Tanechi wouldn't lose to him. She laughed and agreed that her partner was indeed very strong. Ruri understood that the battle was taking a very interesting turn, because soon there would be a battle between a monster and a fool. Ted watched Tanechi from the side, and the warrior, in turn, tried to find the guy. At the same time, a battle was taking place, and the attack was clearly unexpected for the opponents. It was Ted who was trying to raise his level, which was already 275. The guy understood that only because of the second stage he was higher than these people in terms of damage. He activated the thief's stealth once again, realizing that the caster could cast detection on the entire area. So he should act carefully. All you have to do is defeat the leader of Special Paw, and the siege will be won. Namely, his new victim will be someone more important. Although at that moment, an attack was rushing towards him. Ted managed to activate double jump while the sickle volley was heading towards him, releasing a crescent-shaped aura from the tip of the sword. It was Tanechi who found Ted, and they should finally fight. The guy didn't understand how he was discovered because tanks don't have detection skills. But then he noticed something unusual on Tanechi's sword, namely the sphere of the detection skill. But why does a tank need such a thing? This man was aggressive and activated detection again. This thing allowed one to see the location of the target regardless of its status. Afterwards, he also used the chain link. It was a skill that allowed the user to release 3 shockwaves, and when they hit, the target would receive debuffs in the form of stun and bind. Will Ted be able to dodge this or not? He understood exactly what kind of skill it was, and also that even one debuff could simply kill him. But he also understood that none of the attacks should hit him. He will have to try hard to make this true. The first 2 attacks flew past him, and all that was left was to dodge the third. I also managed to dodge it, albeit with difficulty. The guy was so busy dodging attacks that even his stealth disappeared, but he can't hide forever. Tanechi suggested settling everything like men and fighting. Ted, in turn, tried to understand how many shots he might need, taking into account crits, damage, and all passives. It will take approximately 6 shots exactly to the head. But how to deliver these shots taking into account the fight with the Ranker? Tanechi activated the chain link once again, but the guy still managed to dodge such things. Ted tried to find a gap in the action in order to launch his attack at that time, and he managed to find it. Namely, after activating the skill, he did nothing for exactly a second. Although it was definitely not because of the cast, and all because he used the blue dragon charge to close the distance. But the guy will be able to use this tactic to his advantage. Tanechi realized that the guy accepted his challenge and was happy, so I used the chain link right after. But Ted, in turn, used 1,000 steps, and then the double jump. But at that very moment, Tanechi reminded him that there was one more volley left. But this is what Ted was expecting, after which he was immediately ready. Activate your musket to strike back, namely, a lightning charge that should hit straight into the head. But will everything go according to Ted's plan? Tanechi was shocked by this outcome of events and did not have time to react. Lightning flashed throughout the forest, and that's for sure. It was a stroke of luck on Ted's part that he was able to land on a tree not far away. But all that was left was to wait for information about the damage received. Tanechi was also amazed by such intelligence and did not expect such damage from the musketeer. Now the man became more aggressive and said that they should finish quickly. He applied the expansion of the territory, namely the Dragon Zone. This skill allowed one to create an area from which it was impossible to exit. And it all looked like a translucent dome made of fibers, after which he immediately activated an attack skill. To be more precise, Blade Dance releases multiple crescent-shaped volleys from the tip, which broke everything around, namely trees and their branches. Ted understood that the tank most likely wanted to clear the area so that there would be no place for cover. Immediately after, Tanechi used Blue Dragon Charge to reduce the distance with the enemy, and he found himself very close to the enemy, although only he thought so because he was attacking a goblin. The man couldn't understand how it was possible for a goblin to end up in front of his weapon, rather than the monster he was hunting. After the attack, he jumped up into the air and wanted to find Ted. But this guy was not so simple, and was already behind Tanechi. He immediately activated Field of Vision to increase damage, namely, to receive additional damage in the amount of 94%. Tanechi knew that the guy was behind him and turning around said that he was shocked by the goblin's summoning. But this time he believed that it would not be possible to launch an attack. And all because he knew this and was able to activate the crushing attack. Ted was definitely prepared for this, activating... The skill of steadfastness was active and he could only attack head-on. Since his health was not infinite, he could not delay. Tanechi was about to hit with his fist and asked if the guy wanted to hug. He didn't believe that Ted would be able to withstand the tank's blows with such a skill. They grabbed him and started beating him with fists at great speed. And the guy was just wondering whether he was getting protection at the expense of lost health points or not. And Tanechi was ready to deliver what he thought was the final blow. But as soon as the blow hit the bear's head, he screamed. Ted immediately fired his shot and did not expect laughter from the tank. It's all because Tanechi also activated a defensive skill, namely, Steel Fortitude, which allowed, upon activation of the skill, to return up to 30% of health. He was telling his opponent to surrender, but at that moment, the mosquito got down to business, which successfully managed to stroke health in the amount of 1,225 units of health. Ted, receiving such a heal, asked who should give up in that case. Tanechi was surprised that the guy also had such a skill, but he noticed how his health had decreased greatly. After seeing this, they almost immediately fell to the ground and the tank was pressed into the soil. He understood that he was enjoying himself very much and knew that Ruri would definitely be furious about this. But finally, Tanechi told her that the monster was a musketeer with a bear's head. Ted didn't understand what he was up to, but he squeezed him in his hands and said that he would help his partner. He decided to use the blue dragon charge. The guy didn't understand why Tanechi decided to put a spoke in his wheel until the very end and was already preparing to deliver the final blow. As soon as he died, Ted began to wonder how he ended up in the air. The system reported that the level has been increased to 280. Ruri realized that Tanechi had thrown the monster closer, and despite its strength, it was too careless. She felt that there was no one from their faction nearby, but she thought that was even good. At that very second, the girl activated the expansion of the territory of the Area of Superiority. The first thing she decided to do was to block his escape routes, namely with the help of a heavenly construct, which was in the shape of a cube. The final step was to activate the demon, which she summoned with the help of a magic bag. It was a minor demon Luxiot, but the level was unknown. She was even grateful for the opportunity of such a duel and called the Great Curse of Parasitism, which left Ted shocked and confused as to what it was. But he remembered that a similar cloud appeared before Hecaton turned into a monster. Ted immediately used 1,000 steps and was about to leave before it was too late. But at that very second, the guy crashed into an invisible wall. He couldn't understand at what point the barrier appeared in this place. Ted tried to break it, but it was no use. The hands were getting closer and closer. The only thing he knew was that these claws must not touch him or everything would be lost. He began to shoot them away from approaching, dissolving the unknown hands for a short period. But no matter how much he tried to shoot them, they continued their pursuit. Ted roared and decided to try activating the skill sphere. At that moment, the system reported that the guy's mana had run out. At that very moment, the hands caught up with Ted, and he could only scream for them to let him go. But the goal was not just to grab the guy, but to drag him to the main enemy in order to merge with the younger demon Luxiot. Ted understood that most likely his body would be enslaved in the same way as it was with Hecaton. The damage percentage increased and the puppet and mental instability debuffs were applied. This meant that the guy would no longer be able to control his body and also about the decrease in synchronization with the character's actions. Ted felt sorry that he could achieve so much. But then came an unexpected notification that Shamchan was resisting the Great Curse of Parasitism. Rory, watching everything from the side, did not understand what was happening. Luxiot was a 5-horned demon, but the enemy only had one. She started receiving strange notifications about resistance from some sun. She couldn't understand what was going on with this guy. Something similar began to come to the guy, informing him about the will of the liberator of the sun. And he also saw that Shamchan was resisting. But how should Ted understand this? But the fusion with the demon continued and already amounted to 17%. Many of the armies on both sides began to notice something strange, and someone said that before this a strange cloud had been circling over the plains. They understood that the cloud could possess the player. But was it possible? And wasn't it dangerous? The junior demon had already taken over 33% of the defeat, and it was reported that if this percentage increased by 3/10, he will lose control over the avatar's body, and the hand will have completely changed in appearance. After this, the creature immediately fired a shot from a hand that looked more like a weapon. Everyone said that it is better to avoid such blows, and the shot itself hit the tree. But then something strange happened. The resistance at that very second began to increase and reached 25%. Ted, noticing that Shamchan was not giving up, did not know whether to be happy. What will happen when the percentage of resistance reaches 100%? And can he do something now? The percentage of defeat was already 35%, but the message about partial loss of control did not change. The younger demon did not understand what was happening and simply reacted aggressively to what was happening. His gaze was drawn to something off to the side, namely, the demon was looking at the county in front of him and Ted didn't like it. He was going to shoot at the buildings of Sauron's county. Ted asked not to attack the city where he had been for a long time. But this was irreversible and the projectile was already flying into all the buildings. The explosion was also not small in power, but given the size of the bullets, one should not expect anything less. Everyone began to realize that another hero had eventually turned into a demon and were very scared. Because of such events, he himself came out to the city to the troops. The count who told all people to follow him. Ted didn't understand how this was possible, because just recently he was for them. He noticed that these people were not only weaklings. He realized that these were the guys who were brought by the Moon Priest, and if they were from the county side, did that mean they surrendered? The demon continued to attack, and the guy could only apologize in his thoughts for what was happening. They realized that this could be their idol, whom the guys so dreamed of seeing, but how did he start flying? The explosion was just as huge and destroyed all the buildings in its path. But Shamchan continued to increase his resistance, and it had already reached 30%. At this point, Ted began to be able to move his limbs, which meant that control was beginning to return a little. But he couldn't relax and needed to take some action before it was too late. Since he managed to return a small amount of damage, he needs to make it in time. It was possible to stop not only the county, but also Special Paw while it was still possible. At that very second, he used 1,000 steps. Immediately after using it, he opened the inventory to get some stuff, namely a potion that was accidentally left over from the moment of its rebirth. One great potion to ruin the life of the guild. Berserk increased damage and reaction speed, but had side effects in the form of rage and mental vulnerability. Since he was above the Special Paw camp, he could confidently go crazy and not worry. Ted drank the potion to the last drop at that very moment. The system reported receiving buffs and that the duration would be 10 minutes, but 80% control over the character was lost. Rora didn't understand what was happening and why the demon was above the camp. She realized that the guy had managed to come to his senses and that if she didn't have time to put up a barrier, but she didn't even have time to bring her thoughts to success. Trying to set up a barrier, the magician did not have time to understand what was happening. Her plans were ruined because all the magic was destroyed at once. The younger demon in Ted's body launched an attack earlier, seeing that Rora was trying to make it with the barrier. This creature actually went mad due to the effects of the Berserker potion. He destroyed everything around him and killed everyone he came across. The camp was soon completely engulfed in flames. The head of the guild did not understand how top rankers, a lot of money spent and everything he had done for so long, went to hell because of one strange bear. He roared, realizing that all the work could be ruined by just one musketeer. Ted continued to destroy the Special Paw camp's troops and tents without control. After a short period of time, a notification was received that the potion's effect had ended. The guy who had just come to his senses saw the state the camp was in and was amazed that he had done it alone. And immediately after, it was reported that Shamchan was able to achieve 100% resistance. But a huge number of status windows also appeared, reporting, for example, failure to take control. But since the will of Shamchan was of low rank, the body retained a partial form of fusion. Afterwards, the system reported that the connection could be removed in almost 13 days. Bonuses were also given for merging in the form of levels, new status, and a special ability. Ted was now the boss and was no different from Hecaton. But besides this, a new achievement became available to him, which surprised the guy. It was a Siege Executioner that gave bonuses to percentage increases to damage and defense, as well as increased resistance, but that was not the main thing. He managed to get one against all, which gave the status of an overwhelming aura and an increase in characteristics by 99 units. Ted understood the meaning of such a status, but was very surprised. After all, this maximized the power of stealth skills and he couldn't even dream of such a powerful thing. The system asked whether the guy wanted to generate this status received for 500 murders. Ted had no intention of canceling such a useful status, so he happily clicked yes. After the generation was completed, it was possible to do other things, but the system reported that the crime index had risen to over 53,000, after which a notification immediately arrived that the guy was from that moment on a sworn enemy of the Kingdom of Karen. Since there was now a bounty on his head, he received the status of a demon boss and would be hunted. At the same time, the Count and his subordinates discussed everything that had happened and talked about urgently getting rid of the demon, all because it was impossible to ignore the existence of such a creature, and for this a reward had to be placed on its head. Raiden apologized for interfering in the conversation, but asked to hear his opinion. He tried to explain that Ted didn't mean to harm the state. Those who attacked the entire county did. The boy was a victim and couldn't be left in the lurch. Everyone thought that the man was saying this out of personal feelings, but that was not the case. This was said only because there really was a power dormant in this man that would not be succumbed to by anyone present. Having expressed his opinion, Raiden decided to leave the gathering place. He went to look at the site of the recent battle from the balcony of the hall. He was really curious about where Ted was and whether he had been able to maintain his will. Raiden's soul was full of pleasant memories of such a man, and the man was truly grateful for the preservation of their home and academy. With tears in his eyes, the master saluted his beloved student, who had become his own. Also in the capital of the Pixie Kingdom, there was a discussion about what happened in the Blue Sky Empire Guild. The guys returned from the siege thinking that it would take a lot of time and they would not make it to the meeting, but they arrived on time. This time they were the few who failed their task. Watching the wonderful discussion, an old acquaintance of Musashi, whom they had not seen for a long time, appeared in front of them. The great swordsman asked why Tanechi was shining so brightly, and he began to tell about how he had recently met a very strong guy. Rora was still very interested in the fact that the guy managed to resist parasitism, because everything was going smoothly. At that moment, the announcement of the start of the guild meeting was heard. Ted left these places with tears in his eyes and discontent. The kingdom was forced to put a bounty on the boy's head. He was given the status of a demon, which will make him a target for regular players, so he will have to start all over again in another country. At the guild meeting, they talked about a huge problem that many were facing. Tokichiro, who was the guild master of the Blue Sky Empire, reported the failure to enter the top 7 guilds, and all because the squad's forces were sent to different keys, and they should unite to obtain the status of the best. But for this they need a common enemy. Unfortunately, there were problems with the subjugation of Sauron's county. Although this does not mean that the guild lost the war, because it was only a battle. They had a theory of action that could become the starting point for conquering the entire kingdom of Karen. Now it's time to get the title, 8th place worldwide, and they will need to start by getting the closest one under their control. From the Pixie Kingdom, to which Ted was also heading.